after 4:15, so I think we better go ahead and start our meeting. We've got a few things going on today. Going to open the work session for the Hood River County Board of Commissioners for March 15th, 2021. First up on our agenda, 4:15, is the County Forest Recreation Trails Committee interview. Oh, there's Karen. Good. So Heidi, can you go ahead and bring Jim on the phone?
Yes. Yes. Jim, are you there?
Yes, ma'am.
There you go, Chair.
Thank you. Hi, Jim. This is Mike Oates, Chair, Hood River County Commission. Welcome. Just a couple quick questions to find out a little bit more about us. We understand you're interested in being on the County Forest Recreational Trails Committee, which is great. I did read what you had in your application. Sounds really good, but I'd like to hear it from you in person. Tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this position.
Well, I'm a little bit about myself, I guess. That could go very, very far, but as far as myself being why I'm interested is I am, have a very traditional belief in community. And I'm very fortunate and grateful to live in Hood River County. I've been here probably close to 30 years. So why I'm interested is that I'd like to support the community that, that I have a lot of a love for, I gather. And it just, I believe that's just real important to be involved, be involved in a community. And I believe that's the thread of community, is to have some unity among the politicians as well as among the users, as well as a volunteer trail board.
Okay, could you give us a little bit about your background that'll tell us how that will help you on this position with the Trails Committee?
Well, I got, like I said, I have about 40 years. I have 40 years working. I had 40 years working for the U.S. Forest Service. I've worked in about 4 different states: New Hampshire, Idaho. I worked down in Bend when Bend had about 7,000 people in it, and then up in this country. So I believe I have a pretty good vision from what I've seen in some other communities. And, my background in recreation as a rec specialist trails operations, I believe would be of support to the county. I've volunteered up there doing trail work back before we had a trails committee. I can share with you that I was involved in the grassroots approach for getting a trails committee in the county. The folks in the community of Hood River, some of the trail builders, I would guess, or I would say the trail builders in Post Canyon actually came to me many years ago to ask how they could build a better relationship between what's going on up in Post Canyon and the county forestry. And from that, and from those meetings years ago, the Trails Committee was formed at that level, and then from the other level, it went into this position right now, which is more another level. We had a Trails Committee that we would meet with the county forester. So anyway.
Yeah, it sounds like you have pretty significant background in this area, which is really beneficial. Any questions by any of the commissioners?
I've known Jim for over 20 years, so I'm afraid that there's probably nothing he could add that I wouldn't already know.
Okay. Anyone else? Any questions for us, Jim?
Excuse me?
Any questions for us, the commissioners?
Not really. To be honest with you, it's yeah, I asked some, I don't, there's some broad questions there, but there's a lot to me, and I believe I could be of support, and I really enjoy living in town. So, anyway, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's
yeah.
that's great. We appreciate that your willingness to serve, and we'll be discussing your appointment later in the regular business meeting. So thank you for coming on and giving us the information, and thank you for applying.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Okay. I think we can go ahead with the short-term rental host compliance presentation by Micaela, as I see Micaela's on.
Hello. I think Heidi's going to get me some permissions here. Can you all hear me okay?
Yep. I can.
Okay, perfect. So this is, there's going to be some screen sharing. So once I get those details loaded here. Excellent. Okay, here we go. So thank you for this opportunity to present to you our short-term rental host compliance program. This is designed to be really interactive. So stop me as you have questions. I'm going to try to go through as much information as possible and go over all the questions that you have. So with that, I kind of want to dive right in and start by showing you what we see as the landing page. I think this is what we want to do, share. Okay. So this is the short-term rental host compliance database. And this is the landing page, which is the address identification dashboard. This is what I find to be most helpful is this interactive map here. It functions just like a Google map. It allows you to zoom way out or get really close in. And first off, you can see the different dots. And so those represent the different short-term rentals in different statuses within the county. So everybody's seeing that clearly? Okay.
Yeah. Micaela, is this live? Is this the current map?
It's live. Yeah, I'm logged into the system and you're seeing what they have live available. It updates every night, if not more frequently. Occasionally when I put through an update that I'll actually walk through an example of, it identifies there to be some type of a lag in terms of updating the system, and that's just a function of it really being a live system. So what I wanted to do was give you some examples of what different properties look like and what the data looks like that we're working with. So as you can see in the little key up at the top in the right hand corner here, green is compliant, green for go. It means they probably are doing what they should be doing. Red, non-compliant, blue, unknown. There really aren't very many of those anymore. And this orange is not yet identified. For the most part, we're only going to see more of the red, blue, and orange around the urban growth boundary, which is not covered under our land use jurisdictions presently. So those kind of remain a little bit more fluid in terms of how often they get updated, simply because they're not reflective of what we're actually covering. But as an example of a green dot that is showing us compliant, it's listed here as not an STR. So you can see we're just off of Miller Road here, just right down the street from Commissioner Perkins' place, and we have a short-term rental that's identified as not a short-term rental. And in this situation, it's going to load here. As we see, this is the back-end database of what I get to work with. And so the most important feature here is to acknowledge, why is this showing as compliant? The not yet identified, I'm going to walk you through in a second, but why is this showing as compliant? We have it listed as a short-term rental. The database is pulling it up as such. We go down here to the minimum night stay and we see 30 highlighted. That's identifying what the algorithm has pulled out as something that is not a short-term rental. So this listing has been identified as such to say that it is just a long-term, or what we would identify as a long-term rental. Therefore, it's compliant within the system. Does that make sense? Okay. Additionally, in this situation, this one hasn't been identified yet as an address. So when we're looking at it and we can see kind of what's going on, we say, okay, so it's in the vicinity of Miller Road, you know, what would that property be? And I've got a couple different ones queued up here. So this is actually the property here using the county web map. And this is part of what we have to do occasionally. When the system first dropped, we had about somewhere between 40 and 50% of the properties that had been identified were linked, meaning that they had the actual addresses available and had used the assessor information to appropriately link the addresses found or the properties found through the online listings. So I was tasked with going through the rest of those and actually using sort of the boots on the ground information that we had to go through and get the rest. So our web map was a really great tool. Sometimes we just knew what the houses looked like and had a better sense of really what was out there, and we were able to do it that way. In this case, we can see that the address is 6125 Miller. And so what we're going to do is go in here, and this is the part that we manipulate. So it's going to self-populate there. Again, it uses like a Google platform, so it's very user-friendly. There's no additional apartments or condos that we know of. And we are showing that, you know, per the map in terms of what it's found, that this is, we're happy with that. That's the latitude, longitude piece. And now what it's done is it's gone into our assessor database and pulled out the listing for this specific property that matches the map and tax lot. And it says, this is the owner. And we know that to be the case based on what we just found on the map. And so we're going to click yes. And then this is where we would go ahead and enter in some information saying county assessment information, info, account number, let's see, 5922, and then I'll put my information in there, and then we'll close it out. So that should work. And then what it will do is it will go through the process of updating that on the back end. And then the next time we get logged in, it will show us what's going on as far as that property being identified with the owner as well. Any questions on any of that? Okay, let me just make this screen a little bigger, make sure I can see you. Okay. I didn't see any there. Speak up if you have something.
This is Karen.
Sure.
So in that example, it was green, which meant it was approved, but the listing of 30 days or more, does that circumvent what we're trying to do when folks enter the 30-day minimum?
It does. And to that end, one of the features that is shown on the database here on this dashboard is this this table that's right down here, the bottom right-hand corner, and it shows the breakdown between the minimums night stay, and it breaks it down between 1 and 7 nights, so a week, and then it goes right the way over to 30+ days. And the not specified column that's identified as 7% right now is kind of a new column. That's not one that they've been tracking. I'm not sure exactly how to use that information yet, but I can tell you anecdotally that the week stay versus the month stay has been between, it's been consistent. It's been at like 90% and 10% for the whole time that we've had this database. So while we may have thought or could have assumed that there would be quite a big jump to 30+ days to just skirt the system, that really hasn't been the case. So we'll keep an eye on that, and that's one of the more useful tools that exist on this dashboard here. There are some other pieces of information that are a little bit more difficult to interpret, and they're working on making that a little more user-friendly. But that's a great question. Any other questions?
Yeah, Micaela, in the description where it says that this is a 30-day or longer rental, does that mean that host compliance has found it advertised as such publicly, or where did that information that it is a 30-day rental come from?
It does. Yeah, that's exactly right. So this is the behind the scenes information that host compliance has found. And in this situation, there's 2 listings that they've identified, one for vacation rental by owner and one for Airbnb. This is what these 2 different tabs are. And in both cases, what they found is they're pulling information off the site and they add it to their database that then interprets and said it's a 30-day or more rental. And so we can actually open up the listing itself, which is the Airbnb listing for this property. I didn't have it preloaded, so it's going to take a second. Let's see. So that one looks like it's not on right now. In theory, we would be able to go and actually look at the listing itself to show that.
Well, they're actually living there full time now, so they're probably not vacation renting it.
Good, good observation. So we can see that information as far as what they have listed on the timeline of activity, right? So what I see here is they pulled the listing as of February 6th, probably recently, for the Airbnb listing. But what I don't see is that they pulled the VRBO listing. So that may still be live. So there's a lot of details that we can use to kind of track and keep an eye on things. What this side piece of timeline activity also shares is documented stays. Per host compliance, the definition of what that means is that a review has been provided. And so you can't submit a review on these platforms without actually having a stay. And so they're very cyclical in their process, wherein they send out responses and request those reviews so that they can continue to have that symbiotic relationship with both the host and the individual that's staying there. And to that end, they collect that information, and then that's used to show what's identified as a stay. There are more tools available that would allow you to further assess, for example, transient room tax assessments, and kind of use this as a tool to gauge whether or not the financial records are matching as well. That's one of the additional sort of add-ons that could have been available to us, or may be available to the finance department if at some point that's something that they were interested in pursuing. At least that's what I recall when we had the initial details shared. Good questions. Anything else on this one?
So how many other short-term rentals show up on Miller Road, just out of curiosity?
Let's take a look here. So live map. There's Miller Road. There's not a whole lot. You can see Miller Road right through there. There's a couple up at the top.
Got it.
Known entities.
Yep.
Let's see.
What do you think, Les? Is it accurate?
Yeah, I think that's the cluster that's on the north end, and yeah, there may be a couple others on the south end that aren't showing up, but not entirely sure.
Okay, so let's see here. The other piece that I wanted to share was some of the red dots. And let me get down to the one that I want to look at. So red dot is going to identify properties that are not in compliance, and that can be for lots of different reasons. The one that I want to highlight is one that has actually gone through the process with us, right the way through the process with us. Let me pull it up here. Get out of this one. So this is the Pruitt property, and it has made its way right the way through the citation process. It's been seen by the hearings officer, and we'll have liens levied against it later this week. And we see that it is still active. This has an active listing up here. It's identified. We know that because we've got the information there, but it's not compliant because we don't have any land use that's been provided. And so in this situation, you can see really clearly here where it started to be listed, and then the different listings and stays that have been, documented through the time, as well as the different correspondence that actually gets sent out through the system and is tracked within host compliance. And so let me move this. The first letter was sent in October of 19. And these are letters that we drafted and host compliance sends on our behalf. We can and do modify as needed. And so the first page is just a very simple base letter with that reaching out, let them know that we've identified them and that this is, a short-term rental violation. The second page is actually a unique identifier, and it's the host compliance listing page that says, this is real. We actually did find you. This is what you're showing in your online platform, and this is what we're aware of as far as what you are demonstrating to others. So we can see here, Caleb is listed as the user, kind of in the middle there with his little circle. You can see what it goes for per night, and then you see the actual pictures again of what's there. And so that's the first one that was sent in October. And then we pursued enforcement with the second letter January, and then COVID struck. And so there was some timeframes of downtime in between there, but essentially the second administrative civil penalty warning is on point with our process right now. And so again, host compliance sends these for us. Another listing here, the other thing to notice is right up here at the top right hand corner, you can see it says January 8th, 2020. So it's taking a screenshot and timestamping it to demonstrate that this isn't an old picture. It's exactly the same, time frame of when the letter is sent. So you can see that those all match up. And that's the step that we go through. What's not reflective here and what kicks in on an individual basis is the next step in the process, wherein we actually go through and send the citation packet. And then go through the process to bring the property to the hearings officer. In this case, the hearing was in November, and there was a no-show, and so there was $1,000 fine that was issued upon the issuance of the citation, or the hearing officer's decision, which was the 31st of 2020, December 31st. So we're going through the process of getting that liened. And looking to develop and establish what the steps are next should this property remain out of compliance. So questions on that?
How are you verifying that the owner is receiving this? Is this certified mail?
It is certified mail, and oftentimes certified and regular mail once we get to the point of sending it through us. The other piece is that host compliance will acknowledge delivery of the actual letter. So we have a copy of that showing. In this case, we have certified mail receipts that are part of the packet. And sometimes we don't get a hold of them, and we don't have a way of doing that. So we are looking into actively creating profiles that would let us function like a Airbnb user and get in there and really try to reach out to them for contact. The host compliance database has details that they provided from different precedent setting cases in California that speak to some gray area when you start to do more sort of gotcha cases. If we were to sign up for a listing or make a reservation and do it with the intention of finding someone, there's some legal gray area there that we're aware of and don't intend to sort of pass down that path yet without more of a plan. But that's certainly one of the tools that we're looking into. Let's see. Other questions about that, or kind of what that looks like?
I'm just curious. So there's that side of it. There's the TRT. So are they paying TRT, or how do you track that, and what's that mechanism look like?
So I have access to the shared database that Budget and Finance uses for the registration of transient room tax certificates, as well as payments that are made quarterly. So those are it's a voluntary system. It's a voluntary payments that are made. So I can check and see what's going on. Deanna is also a good resource that helps to. She's actually the one that receives and tracks that information. I just simply have access to the database. In terms of fining back taxes or other things like that, that's not part of anything that we've looked at pursuing. But it's certainly something that is is on our radar. As far as transient room tax conversations go, the properties that are located around the urban growth boundary. They are not covered under the current land use regulations, but for their responsibility to pay transient room tax. And so when we're able to get in touch with them or they reach out with questions, we walk them through that process to make sure they're aware of those obligations and how to go about creating and submitting for their own transient room tax certificate.
So just out of curiosity, what's the reason for not, it seems like failure to pay taxes would be a fairly big hook. Besides they're operating as a business, so then they also should be paying the business tax.
So the personal property business tax, I'm aware of having worked in the assessor's office, but that's a separate program that I think Juan spearheads. And so that would be something that he is doing and or is aware of on his own. The transient room tax piece, while it's a component of what we loop into our approvals when they go through the process to gain a license, it's not something that we have as of yet pursued directly. Erik, help me out if I'm speaking incorrectly, but it's not included in our land use regulations with regards to short-term rentals just on its own, but there are other county code standards that potentially would allow for it. We just haven't gone so far as to create, for example, a template that may speak directly to transient room tax obligations.
I would just say that early on in the process where we had folks operating, a percentage of those were paying TRTs, but just had not gone through the land use process yet. And I would say that most of the folks that are new coming, they are not paying transit room taxes. All of those that we have identified, for the most part, I think are all paying transit room taxes. Those that are initiated through, that come through a review process, then the TRT program is triggered. It's a requirement of their permit that they do so within a certain period of time. If they're already operating, we usually give them 60 days to get registered and start paying their TRTs. And so I guess the only ones that are kind of in the loop that we could probably be doing better on are those that are within the urban growth area that we know about. And even though they may not be a violation, we could still certainly reach out to them and say, hey, if you're going to operate, please be aware that we don't have you identified as paying TRTs. And we've done that in a couple cases where we have essentially said, even though you're not regulated, if you're not paying TRTs, we have another mechanism to treat you as a violation.
Okay, any more questions on that piece?
I mean, I have a lot of questions about the UGB and how that functions, that no man's land, why that exists, and what we can do about it. But go ahead with your presentation, and then maybe that's one of those things we can touch on towards the end. Okay,
very good. One of the other features that I want to share is the letters database that speaks to who and when these letters are sent. And so within this database, you see that we've sent 72 letters in the history of the host compliance database. Looking at kind of narrowing it down a little bit to, you know, first notices versus the administrative second notice, we'll see a shift in those numbers there. And specifically looking at, you know, who's in compliance now versus not. And we see that of those 50 that we had sent, that 43 of them are in compliance, which is great. That's what we would look for. That's what we want to see. Some breakdown, and I did some additional review of what was left. Essentially, 5 of those represent duplicates that also have administrative level letters. So they're one property that has been sent multiple letters, which we would expect to be the case as they work through the process. And that 2 of them, there's really only 2 in there that are likely to move forward with the administrative process as far as getting that next step. Does that make sense? So it's the system's working like we would want it to. It's getting a lot of responses, and these are letters that are sent out. We can see we can see what they look like. We can see, is it listed currently? Does it meet a short-term rental? So in this case, it's not listed, but it would meet a short-term rental. But for us, we want to make sure that it's not listed, right? It means that they're not renting it, even though they know that the system, they know that the rental exists. It's not currently doing something it's not supposed to. And so in that situation, it's compliant. Okay. Same is kind of true if we're looking at what's going on here. What do we have left? The people that have gone through to get a second letter and that are still not compliant is what this list is showing. And so in this case, we see the Pruitt property, which is the one that we looked at, and we discussed that's going to be the one that has gone through the hearings officer and will be liened shortly. Additionally, the Long property here has an approval that has been issued. Wells Fargo is one that will also be liened. And let's see, what else did I find? This will be one that moves forward to the hearings officer. This property here, La Montage, they have an application that they're working on with staff here. So there's really only one of all of these that needs to move forward to the hearings officer. So again, the system is working. We have the pieces and the individual bits of information behind all of these individual properties. That is what I had on my list of things to share. Are there pieces that you want me to show or go back over within the database?
Micaela, I might jump in just for a second, just to give the commissioners an idea of how this works. We actually had one recently where they were in violation. They received a first letter. They took it off the market, and it was off the market and gotten a green dot for, or actually was removed from the system. And then they started re-advertising it here recently. And so that's an example of where through this process, even if you stop and are thus compliant, you still can get back onto the system if you start operating again. And so that's an example of that occurring here recently.
That's exactly right. So we troubleshooted what that might look like and kind of tried to anticipate how to catch those that maybe tried to really work the system. And in this case, it appears as though based on what we will send out for letters as of April 1st, that they will get a letter appropriately putting them on notice. So.
Micaela, this is Mike. I kind of want to take some of this time now to talk about what Les was bringing up. I had the same questions about, so where are we with this urban growth area, and how is that working or not working, or what do we need to do to start addressing that? Because it seems like I get more questions or complaints in that area than the whole rest of the county put together.
I can tackle that one, Micaela. So essentially, as you indicated, yeah, the urban growth area is a no man's land. The reason that it is because the county on its own cannot independently adopt an ordinance that would apply within the urban growth area unless it's first vetted with the city. And the city has their own short-term rental ordinance. And so the idea is that the city is in a perfect situation would have that the county would be essentially implementing the city's ordinance within the urban growth area. So at this time, the city has not yet given the county an ordinance with which and requested that we adopt an ordinance that would implement their short-term rental guidelines within the urban growth area. We certainly have talked to them about that, but we also have other things within the urban growth area that are also outdated, and at some point we need to package those up and try to get those adopted, and that would include short-term rentals. So in the meantime, we are not enforcing against short-term rentals because the county's ordinance does not apply, and we have not yet adopted the city's ordinance. And so until that happens, they're essentially unregulated.
So Eric, what can we do as a commission to try to resolve this? Do we need to work with the city more? We need to push them a little bit? Or what's your suggestion here?
Well, I think there's a couple suggestions. Certainly, yes, you could reach out to the city. But I'd also say, is this a high priority for the board? Certainly, our department has limited resources, and we're doing the best we can with what we've been given. If this is a priority, then we certainly can elevate that up on our list of to-dos.
Okay.
Erik, I'm a little confused. The city has an ordinance, and you're saying, what does the city need to do for the county to adopt the city ordinance? Isn't it just there? Couldn't the county just take the city ordinance and say, this also applies to residents of the urban growth area?
Yeah, so we have a management agreement with the city of Hood River, and essentially, certainly the county could, on our own, adopt the city's provisions within the urban growth area. But typically, the way it works is the city says, "Hey, we've adopted some new code language. We'd like the county to adopt it for within the urban growth area." And so it's not as simple as just saying it's now going to apply. We actually have to adopt it so that it is then applicable to those properties that are in the urban growth area. The management plan isn't set up to apply directly anytime the city adopts a code change. It has to go through a two-part process. If the city has to adopt it, elevate it to the county, and then the county has to go through its own process to adopt it for the urban growth area.
Erik, are there considerable differences between the city's plan and our plan that makes it a little bit difficult to enact from our point?
I haven't looked at the city's regulations recently. I know when it was first adopted, there were quite a few changes, but I haven't looked at them recently, and I'm not sure exactly what those differences are now that we've ultimately adopted our own.
So when the city adopts code changes and the county hasn't adopted them yet, then are there no codes applying to the UGA? Because it seems like in the absence of adopting the cities that we would be automatically following the counties until we adopted the cities. Is that not how it works with other code?
Yeah, that's not how it works in this situation. Essentially, we just fall back onto the code that exists today. And if we want to add new language, we have to adopt it purposely within the urban growth area. It's not like the state system where if the state makes a new rule change and that gets adopted, then we apply that directly until such time as we adopt it into our code. In this case, it's two different things, and the county zoning code does not automatically apply within the urban growth area.
Is there a means to make it easier and less onerous on county planning to adopt, just in general, when the city's making code changes to the UGA or creating new rules, since we are basically obliged to follow, correct, what the city does within the UGA under our management agreement? Is there a way to make it more streamlined?
Right. I don't think we're obligated to adopt the city's code. We're not required to. We have discretion. But I think certainly the urban area management agreement could be amended to make it a lot more easy. It could be as simple as saying, if the city adopts changes to their code, then it automatically applies. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that, because there's a due process that's involved. But certainly you can make it a lot easier to where the county could adopt it. But certainly there are implications, and it may tie, for instance, if the city adopts a a new ordinance that the county didn't support, and got a lot of pushback from their constituents, it may prevent you the ability from not adopting it.
I think I
think if I remember correctly, when we went through this, the reason we didn't dig into that was because our initial plan was considerably different, or ordinance that we were considering was much different than the city's. I don't know exactly what the differences are now. I think the first step may be just to compare the two and have a conversation about how we want to move forward if we do. The bigger issue, I think, is a separate discussion about how we handle everything there. But if we're interested in looking at this particular issue, I think we need to understand the differences.
We can certainly look into that and provide that information to you.
Sounds like a good idea, Bob. I think you're right. There has been changes in the last 2 years, and maybe we're more in line with what the city's doing, but I don't really know that. Arthur, do you have any ideas?
Yeah, maybe I know we're a lot closer.
Yeah, I think in broad strokes, they're very similar, but I can certainly imagine sitting where Erik is sitting, that the devil's in the details, and I am sure that it would take some very careful work to identify the issues in the line. And I'm just thinking about the grandfathering, how the city wrote the grandfathering process, and some messiness as to what happens upon annexation is something that sort of has me scratching my head as to which date applies. So there's enough detail there that I could imagine that we should decide affirmatively that we think it's worth Erik spending time on it before we send him off to do that, because I can't imagine it's just going to be something he's going to do in a couple of minutes.
Okay, I think maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more in our work session action items, and see where we want to go from here. I really appreciate all the input, Micaela and Erik. Is there any last minute things you'd like to bring out this afternoon?
I have a question really quick regarding I don't know what it is. What's the cost of us to the county of this system, host compliance?
The cost is just under $7,000 a year.
Okay, and my second question is there this is for either, I guess, Micaela or Erik, is there a considerable workaround to this host compliance observation stuff that's happening in the vacation user community, like something that we're not seeing happen, that they're putting together some site, and that's not advertised as well, or that can block host compliance? I mean, is that happening, or is the industry as a whole kind of aligning more with the regulations?
I think anecdotally, Mr. Benton, to the extent that there's been decline, there certainly has, and I can show you here again. Let's see.
I don't need a lot of specifics necessarily. I was just kind of wondering if there's another vacation rental site that, I don't know. It seems like people that are trying to get around things always seem to figure out a way.
So part of what's been happening, you can kind of see the trends here, is there's certainly a decrease in what's available, week to week, between the listings as well as the actual units. And so one of the distinctions between how the program works is there can be multiple listings that someone has. For example, you have an Airbnb site, a VRBO, a turnkey, a Vacasa, and you could have listings on all those different sites. And so those would all count as listings, but they would represent one unit, right? So the units in Hood River County are sort of slowly ticking down as we sort of look at what things are happening. I don't know if that kind of helps. There is some information that's there that's shown. I'm not aware of anything that exists as a big workaround. I think people are just becoming more aware of the fact that short-term rentals are regulated in many jurisdictions, and figuring out how to do that. I mean, we get a lot of calls through the planning side of things as to whether or not a property is available or eligible for short-term rental, and walking them through what those criteria are, specifically identifying the, residency requirements. That's that is the biggest hurdle and barrier to entry that exists within the county through the land use side of it. And so letting people know about that on the front end before they purchase a second property is just as valuable as working on the back end here.
I've looked into this a fair amount, and from what I've seen, there's the fundamental need that if you're going to be selling something, you have to advertise it, and that's what host compliance looks at, and they do an excellent job at tracking all the possible paths. The only workaround that I've seen where people get away with something is if they have a long-term established relationship with a specific client, they can get away with doing the backdoor rental private private party to private party. But there's only a limit to how much that can happen. And so, we can't find that, but anything where someone's advertising, host compliance seems to be doing an excellent job of finding it.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, like I said, I think maybe we'll talk about this a little more in our regular meeting between the commissioners. Thank you, Micaela, and thank you, Erik, for all your input and all your hard work. We really appreciate it, and it looks like we have a system that's working fairly well. So thank you.
Thank you.
Next up, 5 o'clock is our COVID-19 update with the health department. I see Trish and Darren are both on. Trish?
Good afternoon. How are you? Beautiful day.
Yours.
Yeah, okay. I'll just do a little update. As of this morning, we have 1,074 cases. If you look on the OHA website, you'll notice that we've only had 6 positive cases in the last week. Yay. Right now, we're only monitoring 6 active cases. So that is quite a diminishment for us, which is great. We've had 34 total hospitalizations and 29 deaths. Right now, we have a couple of cases that are persons under monitoring that aren't actually positive cases, but we treat them as such. They are a high risk folks that come from an area of large outbreaks, and so we're monitoring them for 14 days. We have 2 that will be graduating tomorrow and a 3rd by the end of the week. So our monitoring will be way down as well. We have given a total of just under 4,000 vaccines through the county health department, and shared much more with our partners. I know that we sent the letter to the state, and I know that they received it because I got an email back. But I did want to let you know that it looks like starting March 29th, we will be receiving a significantly higher number of vaccines on a regular basis. The state is suggesting that we'll get about 2,000 doses a week starting the last week of this month. And it looks like out of that, 400 doses will be going directly to pharmacies in the area, and 350 or so doses will be going directly to One Community Health to address those high risk populations that they are responsible for vaccinating. So right now we're still working in group number 6, which includes adults over the age of 65. We're doing pretty well, and I think that Darren might have some updated numbers for us on percentages, possibly.
I included those in the weekly situational report on Friday too. I can pull those up in the meantime.
Yes. So starting on March 29th, we will be expanding the eligibility to include adults over the age of 45 with chronic health conditions or specific underlying conditions. It will also include migrant and seasonal farm workers and other agriculture and seafood workers. people living in low-income senior housing and congregate and independent living for the senior groups, as well as wildland forest firefighters. So we are looking at quite a big increase in demand in the next few weeks, and looking forward to getting more vaccine. We do have a plan to continue to share that vaccine with our community partners, including primary care providers, pharmacies if they need it, and One Community Health to make sure that we're reaching those hard to get populations. We're continuing to use Heart of Hospice to help us reach those folks that are homebound and also that have caregivers in the home. So that is a group that we've been doing extremely well on. And if you're not aware, Dr. Van Tilburg did testify this afternoon to the state legislature about how we have strategized, and we are the highest county in the state for those individuals with developmental and disabilities, for the highest percentage of completed folks in that category are in Hood River County. So that's very exciting for us to be recognized in that way. Does anybody have any questions?
Trish, could you told us how many vaccines we're expecting as of, I think, the week of March 29th. What are we receiving now on a typical week?
Somewhere between around 500 doses a week.
So this is, and you said 2,000 or 1,900? I forgot the number.
Around 2,000. Well, they said 1,950 doses, but it'll either be 1,900 or 2,000. They only ship in multiples of 100. So
it's 3 to 4 times what we've been seeing. Is that correct? And so does that mean, are there other sources that aren't being captured through that number? Does vaccine come in any other pathway that you're not reporting on?
Providence has gotten some in the past. I'd have to look back to see how much they've gotten. I do get that report on a weekly basis.
Okay, but we're going to see a significant increase. And are you comfortable? Is there a plan, I should say, is there a plan in place, or when do you plan to have a plan in place for how to step up the clinics and that sort of thing? Yeah, it sounds like you've got a little bit of warning now.
Yeah, we've got a plan. We've got a plan, and we're actually putting it on paper. Oregon Health Authority wants to know what we're planning on doing, but we are planning on providing at least one large clinic a week from the health department, and then also providing our partners with more vaccine. We're talking about doing high throughput clinics in the Mid and Upper Valley starting in April and May. And as soon as we have the ability to do that, we will be putting that into motion.
Can you share that plan with us when it's ready?
Yes.
Thank you.
I'd be glad to.
Darren, did you have anything to add?
Yes, thank you. If I can just circle back to when Trish mentioned the numbers, I just peeked back at as of late last week, we have 50% of our 65 plus population vaccinated compared to about 43% of the state overall. So as of last week, we were the 6th highest county in Oregon. So it was a big jump, and there was a big jump from the week before prior. So it's nice to see what we do day to day actually come out in the numbers too. That's exciting.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, we had a letter from Oregon Health Authority, I believe. Is that right, Trish? That we sent them a letter, and they've got in contact with us and want to meet with a group, including Trish and Darren and Jeff, and they wanted a commissioner on that. Jeff, is this a good time to decide how we should do that? If one of the commissioners are willing to be on that, or later?
This is fine, or you can do it later, whichever is the pleasure of the board.
We seem to have time. They wanted one of the commissioners to be on, and I wanted to have the meeting so we decide who to be on that. How do I say this? Karen, you've been our real health specialist. Would you like to be on that?
I was going to nominate her.
Sure, I'll do that. But I guess my question is, what is the premise of the meeting? What's it for?
Trish?
It's to talk about vaccine supply. I think what's going to happen is they'll tell us again that, you know, it's going to be opening up in the next 2 weeks. They're expecting to see large amounts become available to all the states, and therefore the counties are all going to benefit. That's just a guess, but that's pretty much what I think they're going to say.
The way that I read it, they took our letter to say that we didn't think we were getting our fair share, and I think they're going to tell us that we are getting our fair share.
Okay, that's fine. Happy to do that.
Thank you, Karen.
Well, I have to say, in reading about other states and the distribution issues to rural communities, I feel like Oregon's done a pretty good job compared to some of the other states in having parity for rural communities.
Yeah, you know, this is a sort of a fascinating thing because everyone has an anecdote where they know someone who got a vaccine, who they don't understand why they got a vaccine, so therefore the whole thing is messed up. And I get that, but the reality is it's not. Those just aren't typical, and there's probably something you don't know about that person, and it's really none of your business. And I mean, I really feel for Darren, you know, and for Trish being in this communication business, where everyone has a suspicion that someone got in line ahead of them that doesn't belong there.
We really saw that come to a head after we started immunizing caregivers to people in their families, and people not understanding that, you know, we don't, you know, it's not everybody's business why somebody is allowed to get a vaccine, but there are reasons for it. So we've been really pretty good about making sure that people fit into the groups that they fit into. It's going to be harder as we go along, and it'll be a blessing when we don't have to screen people anymore, when we can just allow them to schedule vaccine. And the president says that'll be May 1st, but I don't know. We'll see how the vaccine supply is at that time.
I would suspect he knows more than we do, so at least
I hope so.
I'd just like to say thanks for letting. They were nice. Trish and Darren and Belinda got me lined up. They were nice enough to let me volunteer a couple weeks ago at a clinic, and it was. I thought it went incredibly smooth. I mean, I'll just echo the comments that the other commissioners have had that have done it, and just really incredible. I mean, there was a little issue at one point where folks were backing up outside, and that was resolved very quickly. I was really impressed with how all of that went, and you know, I have full confidence that that your plan to increase the vaccinations, you know, if it worked anything like that did up to this point, I think it'll be excellent. So I have a lot of faith in you all getting it done.
Yes, thank you. It is a scalable model, and it is something we can really, it doesn't feel like we're working at full capacity. It feels like we could add quite a bit to that. Yeah.
I will make a comment that I think when we get into the farm workers, it's going to be a little bit more problematic because it's a little more difficult with language and culture, and they don't want to get a shot and things like that. But I'm looking forward to getting into that system and helping as much as I can from out here in the orchards. So let me know anything I can do.
Thank you. We are going to be working with our partners around that messaging as well. So we'll be getting ready. We're gearing up for that now.
Mike and Bob, do you have any visibility yet into kind of how it's going to work for the workers that you folks work with? Have you been led into discussions on that subject?
I've been thinking about it, but I haven't had any conversations with the health department or One Community Health or anything about it yet. No, I haven't.
No, I really haven't either. The one thing we have seen is that there's a lot of information being pushed out and a lot of, trying to make that population comfortable and willing to come in and get a shot, because that's the biggest concern, I think. I think the process of getting them through the event is one thing, but I think it's just getting them to show up. And so I know that there is some efforts that are out there that are trying to address that portion.
Yes, and One Community Health will be doing some visits to some farms and doing some coordinated efforts. If you're not aware, One Community Health is working on a pilot project with other FQHCs around the state, and they will be able to start providing vaccines to that group early.
Trish, are you expecting more Johnson & Johnson that you can bring to a location as opposed to the stuff you're getting now that you have to do in a specific clinic?
We're hoping. We don't know yet, and the state does not know at this point what the allocations are going to look like. So we'll just have to wait and see. We should have a couple of weeks lead time, because the state can actually see into the ordering process, and they should be able to by midweek this week to know what we'll start to get in the next 3 weeks. So I think we'll know more by midweek this week.
Great. Again, this is something that people keep asking us about. So if you can just keep on passing the information along, that lets us help keep people informed.
We will do that.
Thanks.
Any other questions or comments? Thank you, Trish. Thank you, Darren. Appreciate all your work. Keep it up.
Bye. Appreciate it.
Okay, next up we have Goldendale Energy Storage Project presentation. Erik Steimle. I see Erik's on. Where'd he go?
You've got a box there.
Yeah. Erik, if you can try to unmute, maybe you can start talking.
Or temporarily
There, it's unmuted. Can you hear us, Erik? Nope, now you're muted again.
Chair Oates, this is Heidi. Erik, I'll go ahead and unmute you.
switch audio.
There you go, Erik.
For audio. Okay, that's what you want. Don't disconnect. You can always call in if you want audio.
Erik, we can hear you. Can you hear us okay?
Call in.
Erik, can you hear us?
Is he a presenter?
He is a presenter, yes. Chair, I will go ahead and send Erik the phone number just in case he wants to call in for his audio instead.
Okay. I'm really looking forward to this presentation, so I hope Eric's able to do this.
Becky Brunn is on also, Chair. I know that Erik was going to do the presentation. I'm not sure if...
Hi, I'm here. Yeah, I was texting with him and he was in and he connected and then he said, I just lost all volume, was a text that I got from him. So I don't know.
We can see you, Erik.
Good.
Oh,
excellent.
Now you can talk too. Okay.
Perfect. I'm
good.
I had to join via
Becky,
phone. I
got
can
it.
hear you.
Okay, I'm going
I
off.
can hear you loud and clear. And then just a few moments before I assumed to be my time, I couldn't hear anything at all. So I'm not sure. I'm sure it's operator error on my end. But apologies.
Okay, well, thanks for being here, and we're still before your time slot, so we got lots of time, so you can go ahead with your presentation.
Okay. And do people have the slides that we provided earlier on to kind of walk through as I talk? Okay.
I think most of us do.
Okay. So first, I want to thank the commissioners and staff for the opportunity to speak this afternoon and provide an update on the Goldendale Energy Storage Project. Of course, I'd much rather be there in person at a time in the future that I think is getting closer as we speak. But I appreciate this venue today. The Goldendale Energy Storage Project, we believe, will be one of the cornerstones of both the Washington and the broader Pacific Northwest clean energy economy. The project's going to provide a number of quality jobs in rural economic development while helping Washington and the region meet its clean energy goals with minimal environmental impacts. I'm going to switch slides and talk a little bit about RI development. So I'm on slide 2 for those following along on the slide deck. So I'm the Vice President of Project Development for RI. We are one of the largest developers of low-impact hydropower in the United States. And in the Pacific Northwest specifically, we are pursuing 2 hydro pump storage projects. In addition to Goldendale, which I'll talk about this afternoon, we are pursuing a smaller pump storage facility in Southern Oregon. That's the fully permitted Swan Lake project at just less than 400 megawatts. I'm going to switch slides and move to slide 3. The Goldendale Energy Storage Project itself, located just outside the community of Goldendale. I'm going to touch on today a little bit about the project itself, what is hydro pump storage, and how it really fits into the modernizing electrical grid. And then at the end, hopefully touch on what this project means for the region and be able to answer any questions, take comments as well. I'm going to switch to slide 4. So on slide 4, if you take a look at this, you'll see this rendering on the left-hand side of the screen itself. And you can see the Columbia Hills, and on the left-hand side of the rendering is the part of the former aluminum smelter site. And then you can see a number of roads and I guess just what look like white dots on this, but those are existing wind towers on the landscape there. And what you'll see are the addition of 2 60-acre ponds. This is the largest visible component of the project itself. All the other features that I'm going to talk about this afternoon are, with the exception of transmission, are underground between the 2 reservoirs themselves, and that's typical for this type of pump storage project. As I mentioned, I work for Rye Development. We are the developer of the facility, and we're developing it in coordination with Copenhagen Investment Partners, or CIP. They are an energy infrastructure investment firm. They're based in Denmark, and they are focused on greenfield and renewable energy projects. CIP has a long track record of investing in projects that address climate change, positively benefit local communities, and create family wage jobs. I'm going to switch to slide 5. On this slide, there are a couple of additional maps that illustrate the location of the project. And again, for those of you familiar with the area, the project itself sits just about 8 miles southeast of the community of Goldendale. And while I mentioned that we're the partner in coordination with CIP, the project itself has been a long-standing vision of the local community, and has, there's a considerable amount of work by local partners in Goldendale and beyond that have elevated the status of this project, and we certainly appreciate the work that they've done and are glad to be a part of it. The project sits within the energy overlay zone in Klickitat County, a zone that took a considerable amount of time and resources over the last decade plus to encourage the redevelopment of this site for wind, solar, pump storage, and other sustainable tech. The project, once constructed, will generate 1,200 megawatts of renewable electricity on demand. And just to give you a little bit of context, and there's a number of ways to look at this, the two main visible components of this project, as you saw in the previous slide, are 2 60-acre ponds to provide 1,200 megawatts of on-demand renewable electricity. So if you're thinking about this in the context of wind, it would take, similarly, more than 7,000 acres of new wind or 53,000 acres of solar to provide that amount of renewable electricity. The site also has the needed acreage, water, and probably most importantly, proximity to transmission to actually provide for this type of energy storage resource. The project does require a one-time fill of the reservoir system itself, and we've entered into an agreement to purchase that water from Klickitat Public Utility District via an existing water right. But the reservoirs themselves are lined. It's a closed system. So during operation, we simply just need water to provide for evaporative losses in the reservoirs. I'm going to switch slides now to slide 6 and talk a little bit about how this type of energy storage project works. So first, I think it's important to point out that pump storage is a very mature and proven technology. The first project was built in Europe over 100 years ago, and there's a number of projects in operation in the US. And while lithium-ion batteries, or the types of batteries that are typically associated with electric vehicles, tend to steal a lot of the attention these days, pumped hydro storage currently accounts for 95% of all the utility scale energy storage currently in the United States. And in addition to being the oldest form of storing energy, it's widely recognized as also the cheapest way to store energy. Our proposed project is what's called a closed loop system. We're moving water between a lower reservoir and an upper reservoir. Water is released from the upper reservoir and used to turn hydroelectric turbines that generate electricity before collected in the lower reservoir and then returned again to the upper reservoir to repeat the process on demand. And the energy that's used to pump water uphill is used from solar or wind. And as such, pump storage hydro is considered a carbon and pollution-free source of on-demand electricity. I'm going to go ahead and switch slides to slide 7 and talk just a little bit about what's driving this project. Now, I've mentioned that the community of Goldendale, pump storage has really been the vision for going on close to 20 years in this location. But why is the time now? And really the combination of popular demand and policy up and down the West Coast is really driving the demand for storage. This project helps electric grid managers balance a rapidly changing electrical supply situation. So when we're talking about, wind or solar, to some extent hydro, with actual commercial and residential demand for our buildings. And compared to other clean energy sources like wind and solar that are intermittent, pump storage enables grid operators to access reliable electricity 24/7. And pump storage, the Goldendale project, aligns perfectly with the Biden administration's clean energy and climate change focus. And of course, the broader goals such as the emission reductions included in the Paris Climate Agreement. I'm going to switch slides to slide 8 and talk a little bit about the cost of the project and some of the socioeconomic benefits to the region. So while I talked about the limited environmental footprint on the landscape, this is a $2 billion plus civil works project. More than 3,000 family wage jobs would be created based on environmental and socioeconomic analyses completed during the early permitting phases, and 60 permanent jobs would be created during operation of the facility. With the assistance of Klickitat County and understanding of the tax situation in Washington, it's estimated that more than $14 million in tax revenue would be provided for rural Washington and Oregon communities annually, and that's during operation of the facility. It's also my understanding that Hood River County's energy plan calls for increased investment in locally generated fossil fuel-free electricity. And while this project is outside of Hood River County, it could become a key component of a regional strategy to generate a larger percentage of electricity locally. And I'm happy to talk about that more afterwards. I'm going to switch slides to slide 9. So talk a little bit about environmental impacts. This project is located entirely on private land, land associated with the former aluminum smelter. So our project proposes to revitalize a portion of that site into a clean energy resource. The project, of course, helps us reduce our emissions and dependence on fossil fuels by being a competitor to current on-demand forms of electricity, which across the U.S. primarily still come from coal and natural gas. This is a closed-loop pump storage system, as I mentioned before. Does not involve the construction of a new dam on a river, and lower investment in transmission infrastructure compared to other clean energy options. So this project sits along the existing high voltage transmission system and essentially allows grid operators to optimize wind and solar on the system. I'm going to switch slides to slide 10 and introduce the project timeline here and a few other items. So I know some people have heard of this project before. Rye Development, we became involved really in 2018 at the project, where we had a number of meetings with local stakeholders and other groups to talk about their vision for pump storage at the former aluminum smelter site. We did apply for and receive a preliminary permit for the project, which just allows us to study the site for potentially filing an application with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. This type of project and the authority to grant a construction and operational license does rest with the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, or FERC. And between 2018 and 2020, we completed a number of environmental and engineering studies with the support of local contractors. That information was put into an application that we filed with the Commission in June of this year. So right now, we are in a spot where we are participating and waiting for the FERC to complete their own independent environmental impact statement or environmental assessment. of the project itself for a decision on issuance of a 50-year construction and operational license. That process just began, and we'd expect the commission to make a decision in late 2022. So if everything goes according to plan, this project, the earliest the project could be commercialized would be 2028. So again, long lead time project, a lot of upfront investment, and we have a project-specific website where project documents can be reviewed. There's a considerable amount of information there to date, and there will be additional information moving forward. But I think also just for folks that are interested in updates, getting questions answered, or also just generally participating, there is a way to sign up. If nothing else, get a regular newsletter on how the project is progressing. And I've provided the link to the site there. So I'm going to switch to slide 11, which should be the last slide for this afternoon. Again, I'd like to thank commissioners and staff for the opportunity this afternoon. I did include my contact information on the slide. If there's any questions that come up afterwards that we just didn't have time to talk about this afternoon, or just something you thought about afterwards, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I appreciate the opportunity again, and happy to answer some questions if there are some.
Erik, I really appreciate your information and your presentation. I've been excited about this project, or the possibility of this project, for a long time. And I think it's just the most incredible common sense project to come along in a long time for energy and energy storage. So I'm really excited about it. A couple quick questions I had. $2 billion, who's financing this?
Great question. So if you go on the project website, there's additional links to CIP's website and some of the projects that they're investing in. CIP certainly has the capability and the interest in paying for and investing this project, seeing it all the way through to operation. And not just that, but holding on to it as an operator for a long time. These are not short life projects. There's a lot of discussion about the lifespan of batteries in general. So if we're comparing ourselves like lithium ion, those are resources that have to be thrown out, and essentially ratepayers are on the hook for completely replacing those projects every 20 years, if not sooner. This is a 100+ year project, and we have the financial backing with CIP to see it through. That said, we will need a number of regional utilities to participate in the project. Utilities right now are facing, a period of time that I don't know if unprecedented is the right word, but a lot of changes in the grid as we add more solar and wind, and also bring coal and other resources offline at the same time. That has created quite a capacity deficit in the Pacific Northwest looking forward. Now, each utility is assessing this differently, but this is the low-cost capacity alternative, we feel, with coal coming offline and these more intermittent sources of renewables coming online. And we'll need to secure, long-term contracts for utilities to participate in the project to make it successful as well, not just the financial backing.
A couple other quick questions. I'll open it up to the other commissioners. The line that goes from the lower reservoir to the upper reservoir, and is it the same line for the water to go both ways, or is it a loop?
Yeah, it's the same penstock. Yes, there's a penstock that connects from the upper reservoir to the powerhouse itself, and then it continues. The penstock continues on to the lower reservoir. Yeah.
And the Klickitat Water District, where do they get all their water?
Klickitat Public Utility District? Is that your question?
Yeah, that's where you're getting the water to start the system. Where do they get their water?
They have a water right. They acquired the water right associated with the former aluminum smelter. And so that is the source of the water. And the water right the aluminum smelter has, once operational, this project will only use a fraction of that available water right to the site.
So does that come out of the Columbia, the original water then?
Yes. Yes, there's a pumping station there that's part of the former aluminum smelter where the water originates from.
Okay. Commissioners?
I was wondering, Erik, if you could explain what is the total energy storage in this? You have a 1,200 megawatt power generation. How long can it keep 1,200 megawatts coming?
That's a great question. So the way the project is designed right now, at 1,200 megawatts or full output, we can provide 12 hours. So 12 hours. However, the project is designed as such that it's unlikely that, every 12 out of 24 hours or 12 hours out of every day that it would operate at full output. It's more likely that you'd be providing, longer periods of storage for certain utilities and less than full output some of the time and then full output at other periods of time, if that makes sense. Just like you would normally use
it does, yeah.
a battery to charge your phone or something else. It will depend a little bit on the system.
And what is the full recharge time if you were going all out to get the water all from the bottom up to the top?
My understanding is it's slightly more than 12 hours. It's just less than 14 hours to fully recharge the system if you took it all the way down. Yeah.
Great. And just for everyone's reference, that's similar. The 1,200 megawatts is similar to what Bonneville Dam produces.
Well, and it's also, when you compare it to battery storage, is what's awesome about pump storage is just that duration at that high volume of output is tough to see in a chemical or other type of battery storage system. So super excited to see this moving forward. It's been talked about for a long time. And the board should know that CREA has been an advocate for the project for many years and has pushed to help push to make it go forward. And so Hood River County is one of the members of CREA. So CREA has been actively working on this for, gosh, I don't know, a decade. It's been a while.
What is the largest pump storage around? I'm sure there are big projects in the world. What's the biggest in the world right now? Anyone know? This isn't a test. You can say no.
I'm not sure. So some of the bigger ones are right around this size. Although I think Ludington is the biggest in the United States. It's in the Great Lakes. It's in Michigan. I think it's 1,600 megawatts in size. I think that's the largest one in the U.S. I don't know of others larger than that.
In terms of other forms of storage, like there's battery storage. The biggest battery storages are tiny compared to this. Correct?
Certainly. And battery storage, lithium-ion storage is going to be part of the solution as well. We're not trying to say it's an either-or type situation, but to the earlier point, when we're talking about long-duration storage, yeah, batteries can't compete with this, especially they can't compete with this at the kind of cost, the low cost that we can provide. And the other thing that's great about the Pacific Northwest is that we're blessed with the geography and the geology to support this kind of project. Providing this type of low-cost, equitable energy storage is going to be difficult in Oklahoma, where there's not 2,000 vertical feet ahead in a short area between the two reservoirs. So we're blessed from that perspective.
Could you talk about the equity side of it? You use that term, and I'm not sure how it relates to this.
I guess I would describe it in the same way that we talk about our current hydro system. Washington and Oregon enjoy across the board, if not the cheapest, some of the cheapest electricity in the United States. And that took a considerable amount of vision, and it takes a considerable amount of management now. It's not without its controversy, of course, as this group knows, but that's what I mean when I use the term equitable.
Thank you.
I've got a question really quick about, I guess, the ownership component of it. I mean, I'm really excited to see this moving forward, but this has been happening for a while, and I think it was 8 or 10 years ago, it sounded like the Chinese were going to try to do some sort of a project. And I guess I'm just wondering, my first question is, so is this this is a Danish company that would then own the project. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And then my next question would be, are these infrastructure projects, once constructed, it sounds like this CIP plans to hold it and operate it, are they easily traded?
Traded mean like, could they sell the project to a utility? Like, I mean, I'll just throw out an example, you know, like Seattle City Light or something like that. Is that the question? Or
no, like I said, yes, sure that, but I'm more interested in selling it to another, you know, government or, you know, ownership outside of the United States.
I would say the general answer to that is no. You know, CIP is set up specifically for investments globally, but they have a large presence in the United States, considerable presence on the East Coast, and have invested in a lot of infrastructure in the U.S. In general, I would say these are large, complex projects. There are people that would be interested in buying projects like this. Infrastructure funds are one. You know, second, and there's probably not many behind this, are utilities, right? Utilities have a sincere interest in owning and operating assets like this for a long period of time. And so they could be some, you know, like any utility in the state of Washington that has a capacity need as the grid starts to change, you know, could be an eventual owner as well. I mean, it's not unlike a lot of the, you know, hydro projects that we do have in the Pacific Northwest. They tend to have ownership for, and I'm talking about the non-Bonneville projects. They tend to have ownership for, you know, a long period of time. They do sell every once in a while, or, you know, you'll see multiple utilities own a single hydro project, you know, and some of that ownership will change as far as who has a preferred option on the water over time, but they don't sell, you know, sell often, I guess is a better way to put it.
Thanks, Karen. Thank you, Erik, for the presentation. I have a couple of questions, too. They are not necessarily based on my personal perspective, but in an effort to represent others that might not have a chance to be here and voice their concerns. And it's around, you know, what would the opposition be around a project like this? And my first question would be around towards like low impact. And for someone that doesn't know a lot about these programs and these projects, your slide of how does pump storage hydro work reminds me of a diagram around fracking, digging deep down and then digging sideways. So I'm sure that there are some folks out there that would consider that a little different than just low impact. So I'd like to have you talk a little bit about that. And then my second question along the same lines is what can you say about the net contribution of energy, minusing out the usage of energy to create the project and then to consider it ongoing?
Yeah, no, those are all great questions. Make sure that I don't miss any of those. So the level of opposition that we have to the project, and there is some opposition, I would suggest is quite low. We've had a number of public meetings in Goldendale when we were first preparing the license application documents to provide the commission. In my history of developing hydro, which is about 20 years now, it's the only place where we've had a well-attended public meeting where we've had a standing ovation as a developer, which is great. But we've had to take on a number of environmental studies to support that application. Although I have never been involved in a project where there's been so much existing environmental information, not just related to aluminum smelter, but the full EIS that the county did to prepare the energy overlay zone. All of that took a considerable amount of environmental, cultural, socioeconomic work to actually get the area zoned or encouraging the type of development for this project and other renewable projects. So we had a lot of information and a lot of groups to call on to begin with. There is opposition in general to development in the Columbia Hills and this portion of the county. It doesn't matter if it's public or private land. Of course, this project sits on private land from the Yakima Nation. And we've been in conversations with them since the beginning of the project. In fact, before we started in permitting, we met with the full tribal council. And so we will continue to try and have a conversation with them on the final design of the facility itself. But I would say that's probably been our, the opposition that we've heard to date. I think in general, there's also concerns about development of any kind. I can't put like my exact finger on, a specific issue like fish, of course, which, this is a closed system, so we don't have impacts to fish. But in general, people have concerns about large scale development, and they should. So I think people come with an open mind, but are also curious about what the visual impacts might be. Or, will this provide additional recreational opportunity? Or what are the impacts to plants? Or will this facilitate additional development? If so, what would that be? And are these things that our community will support, right? So those are good questions, and I don't know if I would lump those in the opposition category, but those are all things that we've heard. And then safety, we're building new reservoirs, so, dam safety, how will that be governed? How will the federal government participate in the federal dam safety process ongoing? On efficiency, pump storage is 80% efficient. And like other battery technologies where, they're having to prove or rely on, modeling for how efficient they will be, it's a pretty easy number to talk about. I mean, there's 39 projects that are in operation in the U.S. and a considerably larger number worldwide. And that's 80% efficient for battery storage is great. It's one of the more efficient sources of energy storage out there.
So Karen, were you specifically asking what the difference between the amount of energy that's available from the battery storage versus the energy that it takes to fill it?
Correct, a net contribution.
So, I mean, what you have to keep in mind is that, we're blessed with wind, solar, and hydro in the gorge. And the problem we've had for years is intermittency of the renewables and then the hydropower. And there's times when we have massive amounts of wind power. We've got solar power now coming in and feeding, and then we've got hydro. And so Bonneville ends up curtailing hydro certain times of the year, or wind gets curtailed. So we have excess energy available at times. And so the pump storage, this concept really helps to smooth that out and take advantage of that excess energy. So instead of not being able to utilize that excess energy, we can store it when it's available, and then we have that available when there's a deficit. So we're in a little bit of a unique situation where we're not like some other places that don't necessarily have that issue.
Thank you. My only follow-up with you, Erik, thank you for the, is if you recall any of the elements around the Yakima Nation's opposition.
Well, I can tell you, what's in the record. This is a traditional landscape for the Yakima Nation, and not just them, but other tribes as well. And they have concerns about additional development on these private lands. And I think the wind projects are on the ground. Obviously, you can see them there, and they're relatively recently constructed, but the tribe, in our opinion, still has some concerns with some of those adjacent wind projects and how those were constructed. And so I think to some extent, we're hearing concerns related to that type of development and wanting to ensure that this project is not developed in the same way. And so for RYE, we reached out early and continue to do so on having meaningful consultation with the tribe. And we understand that that's not, a short process. We understand it's a long conversation. We also understand it's not something that, we'll get to an answer on right away. I guess one of the benefits of of developing a project like this is that it is regulated by the FERC. And so that timeline is long. And we have the patience to continue to have that conversation. We hired the tribe to do studies for us at their recommendation. So when we first met with them, they recommended to the extent practical that we work with their own cultural resources team, their own botanists to do work on site for areas that could be impacted. And we've incorporated all of their work into our application, and that work is now being reviewed by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. The project will have some impacts on the landscape. Of course, the 60-acre reservoirs being the largest impact. But, other types of development that, have a lot of concerns include, long transmission corridors or extensive new access roads. I mean, frankly, this is the only project I've worked on where, well-manicured access roads all the way to the project features are already constructed. I mean, they were access roads either built for the aluminum smelter to the lower reservoir site or extensive access roads built to service the wind turbines up above.
Hey, thank you, Eric. It's almost time for our regular meeting to start, so I'm probably going to shut it off right here. Remember, Eric's information is on slide 11. It has his telephone and his email address. So any other questions or comments, you can feed them ahead to Erik. Really appreciate the information. I'm really excited about this project. I think it's one of the greatest projects I've ever seen for energy. It's just a tremendous idea. So thank you very much.
I thank you, Commissioner, very much for the time. Thank you.
At this time, we got about a minute or two left before our next meeting. And since Lisa's not here for the ordinance procedures talk, I'm going to take a 2-minute break and then we're going to start our regular meeting. Okay. What a great potential project this is.
I thought it was going to go away when that stalled, when the Chinese investors kind of walked away. So it was awesome to see it revive and rise. They're a very competent company, and so have a good track record in development. So it's fun to see it taken off. It really has a huge impact on the potential to develop more renewables in the eastern counties. That storage capacity just makes all the difference in the world. And for economic development around Goldendale and on the Oregon side, you're likely to see another data center, at least one, come into the region because of that storage project.
Oh, yeah, it's so much going to be so much prettier than a giant battery.
Well, and from an environmental impact side, I mean.
Yep, there you go.
Yes, sorry.
Okay, it's past 6 o'clock, so I'm going to start the regular business meeting of the Hood River County Commission for March 15th, 2020. First up, is there any additions or deletions from the agenda? I was going to add under work session action items, under the first one, second one, talk about the UGA questions that we were talking about. So not necessarily an action item, but I think we can slip it in there and talk about the UGA a little bit as a commission. Any other additions or deletions? Okay, any conflicts or potential conflicts of interest? Okay, next up, public hearing. We're going to try to use the new process that Lisa was going to go over earlier in our work session, but I've studied and gone through it several times. I think I can do it, and I'll try to do it even though Professor Davies isn't going to be here to judge how I do it. So we'll see how it works.
Or Mike, we'll judge you.
Okay, yeah, I know you will. Okay, first up, I'm looking for the approval of the second reading the ordinance amending Title 15, Section 15.04 of the Hood River County Code.
I move to
approve. Motion. Okay.
So I move to approve the first reading of title of ordinance as read.
Second reading. Arthur.
I'm sorry. Oh, geez.
Yeah, let's make it the second reading. We've already done the first one.
I move to approve the second reading of said ordinance.
Second.
Second. Okay. This time I'm going to open it up. Is there, Erik, you're here? You have some more information or additional information or answering questions on the proposal? Erik? We can't hear Erik.
Go ahead, Erik. Sorry about that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Commissioner. I don't have anything more to add other than the summary that I gave last time, but I am here if anyone has any questions.
Any questions for Erik at this time? Okay, at this point, I'm going to open it up, the public hearing for public testimony. Is there anyone that's signed up that wants to testify on this matter? Heidi?
Chair Oates, no, I checked the registration just before you started the meeting, and there were no attendees that registered to speak on this public hearing. Thank you.
Okay. There's no other questions, then I'm going to move to the vote. Mr. Babbitts?
Yes.
Commissioner Joplin?
Yes.
Commissioner Benton?
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins?
Yes.
The chair votes yes. So basically, the difference between the different options that we have, the old method and the new method, is we don't have to do the vote twice each time. Once I get used to it, I think it'll go pretty smooth. Thank you, Erik.
Sure, I'm a little confused though. It's described in our packet. It's described as an option, but isn't that what the charter now requires, or can we do it either way?
That's a good question for Lisa. The current method was the old option. Maybe she was giving me the option of which one to do. I don't know, but the option one is the new way that we are supposed to be doing it, and it's a lot easier and quicker, and basically accomplishes the same thing. We still give the public a chance to do the public information. At least that's my understanding. Okay, next up. Is there anyone in the audience, Heidi, that has signed up for public comment on anything?
Chair Oates, no, there were no attendees that registered to speak under public comment.
Okay, thank you. I don't know if I stated to the other commissioners or not that Lisa's under the weather, and that's why she's not here tonight. And she might be in on a call if we go into executive session, but other than that, she probably won't be here. She's not doing too good. Okay. Reports. Jeff.
Yes, thank you. I had one item. I think the commissioners are aware that last Thursday, the president signed the American Rescue Plan Act, and the county, by virtue of the president signing that bill, will be receiving over the next 12 months 2 large payments, and those funds can be used in 5 different areas. I'm not going to go into those right now, but the reason I'm bringing this up is I think it would be good for the county to talk about a process by which these funds will be analyzed and reviewed for disbursement into the various categories. And so perhaps for the first meeting in April, that can be put on the agenda and the board can start that discussion about the kind of a process we'll go through to figure out how that money is going to be used. That's the only item I have tonight. Thank you.
Well, it's a big item though, Jeff, and as we start getting closer to April 1st, any information you have that you can feed out to us so we can start doing our homework on it would be appreciated. I know this.
Yeah, my hope is.
Go ahead.
My hope is that we actually get the agreement that we will be required to sign, so that we have some more definition. Just like when the CARES Act funds came through, we did receive some pretty clear guidelines from the U.S. Treasury about how that money could be used. I am hoping that we get clear guidelines as well beyond, the broad categories that have been provided to us at this point. And that will be helpful in terms of figuring out what this money can be used for. I don't know that we'll have that by April 1st, but it's possible.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Babbitts. Oh.
Yeah, a request of staff concerning the information Jeff's going to be bringing back. What I'm trying to understand, so I read through the bill, at least I skimmed it and read the subjects I thought were relevant. And where I can use some guidance is in understanding, so we're given some pretty broad latitude for how we can use the money that comes to the county, but there are also other sources of funds to many of the same potential recipients. And I'll just give a simple example that we can look at losses in hospitality and tourism, and we can help out there, but there's also a separate schedule for assistance to restaurants, for example. When we get to trying to decide where we want to allocate the funds, it would be helpful to know what other sources those potential recipients already have, so we can make sure that we're not doubling up and figure out where the need is greatest. It's left over.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry. And am I supposed to speak?
We'll go ahead with the commissioner's reports now. Arthur, you got a report?
I do. So McCack and Mid-Columbia Housing would be the two that I'll give a report on. Mid-Columbia Community Action, we have gone through most of the long-term planning process. We have one more meeting coming up where we're going to kind of try to wrap everything up. It's going extremely well. In the meantime, we have a special board meeting that we've scheduled tomorrow, and unfortunately, I don't know what the issues are, but there's a lot of commitments that have to be made concerning the Hamilton, which is the old hotel that McCack is looking at converting into housing. And so that's going to be the subject of the discussion tomorrow, and I'll have to just keep you informed as to where that goes. But that's a pretty major project, which I suspect you've heard about before. But it's a major project that Community Action Council is looking at. Going to be a big investment, take a lot of effort, a lot of resources. So if anyone has any wisdom to offer me on that, I recognize the continuity isn't great with Rich not being on this anymore. And so if you know anything that you want me to know about that project, please let me know. And then Mid-Columbia Housing, I went to my first board meeting on that. I've been trained and went to the first board meeting. Nothing major happened at that board meeting. I will say that one of the confusions, they're very confusing because there's the Washington side and the Oregon side, and we share a board meeting, but we can't vote on, the Washington folks can't vote on certain things that are statutorily Oregon business. So the board meetings are surprisingly confusing, and I'm having a bit of trouble following them, but I will do my best, and I hope I will get smarter about them as time goes on. Additionally, I'm not sure if it's not exactly a committee assignment, but I reached out to the AOC based on my interest in working on Oregon's taxation system. And based on that, I had a discussion today with Commissioner Jayapal from Multnomah County about a group that she's working with that's looking at possible proposals concerning Oregon's taxation system. And I'm trying to get involved in that because I think it's something that's very interesting. I have some opinions on that and some thoughts on that. So I volunteered to jump into that morass. I'm sorry, you're muted. Did you say something to me?
Thank you. Commissioner Joplin?
Thank you. I don't really have anything to report. My assignments are kind of just continuing working through the COVID vaccination process, assimilating information. Center for Living is still in a stabilization process. Reviewed our executive director and offered another year agreement with her, and continuing to financially stabilize. My only piece for Arthur on that Hamilton complex, one of the most impressive pieces for the Community Action Council and super important, it's been in a transitional housing format. And there was some legislation that came through this last session called Turnkey, the Turnkey Project, if you're familiar with that, and it was monies available to invest into hotel type complexes and move them into affordable housing options. So the funding did not really follow the decision quite yet, but I'm sure Kenny LaPointe can help you figure some of those pieces out. But it might be something that Hamilton falls into.
Yeah, Kenny's been all over those, all over the funding aspects, and it's just great to have a director who is very good at explaining all of those issues to us.
Any questions for Commissioner Joplin? Thank you, Karen. Commissioner Benton.
Thank you, Chair. So the first update I have, not a whole lot of new information on the Bi-State Bridge Working Group, except that it looks like the group is slowly moving in the direction of the P3 model, public-private partnership. That's an assumption. It really seems to me to be the only option at this point that we can get a bridge built. I think it's just getting everybody to kind of understand that and be comfortable with it. So, as I said before, thank you to Commissioner McBride and Mayor McBride for pushing so hard to hopefully get the group moved in that direction. But there's still work to be done, and we're definitely not there yet. But there definitely is a much more openness to that idea. And like I said, in my opinion, it's the only way we get a bridge is to go that route. I think it was interesting to hear the infrastructure project down the river here going and looking, similar, not the same, but kind of a similar model where an outside entity does it and puts it in. Anyway, so that's the update there. Also, it may be that Arthur's doing more of this stuff than I am, because I don't know if I have the patience to deal with this group a whole lot longer. Not that they're all not great people. It's just that they have much more faith in traditional methods in getting a huge infrastructure project through than I do. So anyway, the next one's Norcor. I think I may have mentioned this at the last meeting. I hope I'm not being repetitive, but we'll officially, I think, have the budget this Thursday, or at least the initial presentation of it. I directed staff to bring forward a budget with the same increase as last year, which is 4%. I think, like I said, I think I already said that, but until that's actually presented, that's not official, but we'll see what happens. Staff thinks they can do it, so that's a good thing. The next items, I guess, Regional Solutions haven't had a meeting yet there, but Nate reached out. We're ready. I think Wednesday we have a meeting, so that'll be exciting. I'm excited to jump into that. And then the last item is I met with the sheriff a couple weeks ago. I had an inquiry from somebody in the public asking about 24-hour coverage. I didn't really have a great answer for them, so I reached out and met with Sheriff English, and he had some good information. And so I thought it may be valuable if we invited him to perhaps our next meeting to give us an update on where that's at and where we're at and when we think we'll get there. Because it was really, he's very optimistic, and it was a great meeting. And so I think that it'd be good to have that in a public setting where people can hear his take on that. Anyway, that's it.
Any questions for Commissioner Benton?
Not a question,
Perkins. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Arthur.
On behalf of Commissioner Benton, I did attend one of the bridge meetings when he was unavailable. It concerned, it was a scheduled EIS, one of the multiple meetings necessary for an EIS process. And the subject of the meeting was whether, after taking public testimony, whether to continue with the recommendation for the bridge alignment which is the one that that we've all seen and we all know about. And after taking testimony, I'm not sure there was a lot. There was some written testimony, no oral testimony. The decision was made to continue the EIS process with the same alignment that we've been talking about.
Okay, Commissioner Perkins.
So McKed, it's been plugging along, nothing major to report. We did finish a review of the director, Jessica Mehta, and went well, and happy to be on good terms with her, and looking forward to hopefully many years with her at the helm. Energy Council kind of overlaps with CREA in some ways, and AOC. There's just a ton going on in terms of bills that are moving through the legislature. There's 2,500 bills moving through, and a number of them on the energy front. And so really trying to keep up with and dissect what each one of them are. There's competing ideologies. There's a couple of different avenues of 100% renewable bills that are moving along. There's one that is more focused on a regulatory process using DEQ and the Oregon Public Utilities Commission. It is favored by the investor-owned utilities. It's been largely shaped by the investor-owned utilities. And there's another bill moving along that a solar developer who's developed a few projects in Oregon. I think he's based in Prineville. Anyway, it's a RPS, using the Renewable Portfolio Standard. So basically what the state's been using as a guideline for renewable development for the last 10 plus years. And it's more market-based and is likely to result in projects moving a lot faster. So the two bills are kind of competing right now and bumping their way through. It's going to be interesting to see how this plays, because the Republicans are definitely not wanting to see a cap and invest, cap and trade, carbon credit type of a bill, wanting to see more market-based. And a good portion of the Democratic leadership wants to see that. So I don't know if anything will actually end up coming in. And then there's some other green tariff type of programs that would allow communities to develop their own opt-in type of program where you could choose where you want your power to come from. It would allow, for instance, Hood River to develop a plan to buy power specifically from certain types of projects. So Hood River County, City of Hood River could develop their own, hey, Pacific Core, this is our power mix that we want to see, and then a rate would be set. So interesting stuff. No idea where it's all going to end up. There's a whole bunch of water bills moving along too. I've been participating at AOC on the water bill side of things. Nothing earth-shattering, but definitely some water planning and some infrastructure type of bills. And then there is the public safety, which I'm co-chairing, and I'm learning a lot about the pitfalls of the public safety side of things, and things that I didn't know existed before I came on as co-chair. One of them was that we didn't consider anything that was a gun control bill. However, the co-chair of the Public Safety Committee brought it up as, I want this to be considered, and it was considered and then opposed, which was basically a bill that would allow cities and counties and other municipalities, public entities, to restrict access to buildings with a concealed weapon. So even if you had a concealed weapon permit, you could basically post that weapons were not allowed inside the building. And so it's created a bit of a challenging rift amongst the communities. Heavily supported, the no vote was heavily supported by pretty much all of the rural counties and a lot of the western counties too, with really a couple of the larger counties wanting to see it go through. What's really important is on the funding side, in terms of community corrections, there's a lot of movement in trying to figure out how to properly fund community corrections in light of previous bills that passed and initiatives coming from the governor's office in terms of figuring out how to restructure policing and the issues associated with equity and justice. And so the funding has been changed a bit. And so there's potentially some big shortfalls in community corrections. So there's a lot of work being done in trying to figure out how to properly fund community corrections going forward. So again, it's all moving, no clarity. Probably won't see any clarity for another couple of weeks or more. So I'm really tired and did not realize exactly how much I was signing up for. So I'm looking forward to the legislative session being over.
Any questions for Commissioner Perkins?
Are you predicting another walkout? Is that what you were hinting at?
I think there are a whole bunch of opportunities for walkouts. Yes, I would anticipate, judging by the way that things have moved in a non-bipartisan fashion, I would expect there to be lots of opportunities for that to occur.
Hey, Les, I'm beginning to realize just how much time you've been putting into these things, and I appreciate it. I know it's got to be difficult and try to run your regular job at the same time, but thanks for all you're doing.
I got a little sick this weekend, and I think it's because I was so exhausted by the time I got to the end of this last week, and it's the first time I've been sick in a long time, and so it was kind of one of those indicators that might have to slow things down just a little bit.
Yeah. Well, thanks for all your time. Okay, I got a couple things. One, a couple months ago, a group from Hood River gave me a petition and wanted me to get it to the Act 1 ODOT manager. It had to do with their opinions about what should happen in the urban renewal area of 12th and 13th Street. And they knew that I was on the Act 1 thing, so they asked me to present it to Mr. Winsheimer, and I sent it to him, and it took like 2 times of sending it to him before he got it. But anyway, he called me this last week, and wanted to talk to me specifically, even though I really am not involved with it, but wanted to know what exactly their concerns were. And so Friday, I had a good conversation with Mr. Winsheimer. He's a great guy. I told him that it's my understanding that most of this is coming from the outer city limits, of concern that you're going to restrict the traffic flow on 12th and 13th Street. And we use that quite a bit in Hood River County for thoroughfare, because it's one of only 2 state highways between the river and the Middle and Upper Valley. And I think that was basically what I told him. Now, I'm hoping I'm not out of line there, but that was my understanding of what that group was concerned about. And he said, well, he appreciated that and he understands that. And as they move forward, that he knows that they're going to have the urban renewal groups presentation of what they want to do, and then he has to keep into consideration that this is the state highway and it has a purpose for not only the city of Hood River, but for the state and people that are driving through this community. So anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know I didn't want to do something behind your backs or anything, but I'm not pushing it one way or the other. He knows about it and hopes to be involved once the urban renewal gets to the point where they have a proposal. Any comments from the commissioners on that?
Yeah, so I got a citizen reached out to me about that too, Chair, and I don't know, do we have a role or comment on that happening? Because I'd heard some of the historical things that had been attempted there in the recent years, but this sounded like a new one, and I hadn't heard about it at all yet. And so I don't know, I just don't know what the process looks like and even really what the proposal is.
I don't know a lot about it either. I'm not involved with the urban renewal. Arthur, do you know anything about the urban renewal there?
Yeah, Commissioner Benton, it is the same process that's been underway for quite a while. There've been a series of meetings on it, and it's really just sort of an evolving process. There's a group which is preemptively, they have their points that they wish to make, and they're making every effort to make those points. I would add that besides the through traffic issue, there are also some parking issues brought up by some of the businesses which line 12th or 13th. I always forget which is which, especially on 12th, I believe. So there are certainly concerns. The city's been looking at a wide range of things, including bike lanes, changing changing parking to add bike paths through there. And I think that's where a lot of the controversy comes from, the possibility that rather than having 2 lanes of traffic running each direction, it might wind up being 1 lane of traffic, or 2 lanes one way, 1 lane another way. So there's a lot of different things coming up there. But this is just all the same process. I'm not sure what role we would have. This is city urban renewal and then the state transportation system. So I don't know where we fit in that picture.
Yeah, I guess the concern is just that a lot of us use that road, and so we're not supposed to have a say. I wasn't involved in a petition, but it's just interesting how many people utilize that live locally here, that there's no formal way for us to be informed, or how to, nobody reaches out. I mean, shoot, in Oregon land use, it seems like you have to call everybody and tell them what you're doing. This is a project that's going to impact a lot of people, and there's not a good process to reach out, at least to those folks out of the area, unless we aren't supposed to have an opinion. So
yeah, I
that's,
don't know. I know
concern.
you can certainly sign up. The city website has a way for you to sign up for the urban renewal notices about this. So I get the notices continually, and pretty much every week I get a notice saying that the meeting's been canceled for this week. So I'm not sure what ODOT's process is. So I don't know that ODOT would make a change without. I mean, the urban renewal is where money comes from, but anything that's done to that road has to be approved through ODOT. And as far as I know, there's been no ODOT process yet. And I would just have to imagine that the ODOT process would involve a lot more notice than the city's process would. But I'm not an expert on this.
Well, that's kind of my assumption too. It's just, I don't, with all the rumblings and stuff, it's hard to know, you're the most informed about this out of all of us, it appears. I don't know.
It's my understanding that the ODOT will be involved if there's a change, because it is a state highway, and it's on Mr. Winsheimer's part right now that this is something that may be coming down the pipes. So it's there, and I just want to let the board know if there's a chance for us as a board to make a recommendation, we could at some time with this ODOT. But I'll keep you up to snuff on what's going on as far as anything happened down at the state when we have our ACT meetings, and Mr. Winsheimer knows that we want to know anything that comes before him on that project too. So anyway, one other subject that I was involved with the last couple of weeks is that severance tax on forest land, and I'm glad Doug's on here. I've been communicating off and on with Representative Williams, and a little bit with Representative Thompson. I want to make sure we got the information correctly of the bill that they're looking at right now. Doug, are you on? Can you talk, Doug?
Yes, I am on here. You guys hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. A lot of the things, I think I sent you the letter that I sent to Anna here just a few days ago, and most of it were the things that you presented to me. Did you want to go over them? Would you like me to go over them, or how would you like to handle this?
Well, it sounds like you got it in front of you maybe, so I'm going to let you do that.
I'll do that, and I'm going to be the first to admit that a lot of these are information and thoughts coming from Doug, but I agreed with him and did some of the background work and the numbers on them. For Anna, we've been working on the numbers on the severance tax bill. Some of my information comes from Sunday's Oregonian article, and then most of my information comes from Doug Thesis, our county forester. The bill that's being proposed is the Horley bill, which would be a 5% tax at time of harvest. 2.5% would be for funding wildfire fighting, 1.25% going to the Oregon Department of Forestry and Research projects, and 1.25% would be allocated back to the local tax base. As Doug pointed out, only about 10% of that goes back to local tax base actually goes to the county general fund. So in essence, 4.875% of that 5% tax would not come back to the Hood River County General Fund. So that's a huge reduction in our general fund dollars coming from our own timber sales. This isn't talking about the private timber sales or the other public sales. This is just from the Hood River County owned land forest sales, where we have last 5 years is just under $5 million worth. And at a $5 million rate of harvest, we would be looking at a net loss of somewhere around $250,000 per year over the next 5 years. So it's significant, it's huge. It doesn't tell us the whole picture because it doesn't tell us what we would get from the tax on the privates and the other public lands. But for our general fund specifically on our lands, that's huge. Doug pointed out a secondary consideration or question if they will continue the current fire assessment for fire protection. Public non-federal landowners paid a double rate since public landowners don't get general fund support to lower the fire assessment rate paid. For Hood River County, we as a Hood River County paid $166,000 last year, expected to have a 10% increase this year. If this fire assessment cost continues, we would be paying a double fire assessment rate plus a 2.5% tax rate that would go on this new tax. It doesn't make any sense why you would do both. Doug said that he could understand if we didn't manage our land. However, we do with consistent harvest and maintain substantial road systems for access. This can enhance fire suppression. So in summary, if they continue the fire assessment, then add the wildfire tax, that would cost over $300,000 for wildfire protection, a very substantial increase for the Hood River County. Other thoughts, only a portion of Oregon forest landowners actually harvest their land. So any harvest tax that is used for fire protection is unfairly loading the burden of fire protection on those landowners who actively harvest the timber. Timber harvest and management maintains and supports road systems for access. In addition, while harvesting, the operators have fire equipment, employ fire watchers, and etc., which improves resource availability and response times to mitigate fire risk on forest land. Better access and additional resources provided by forest management and harvesting helps to mitigate the fire risk. Another proposal, suppose you have a landowner who only uses the timberland for recreation. Most fires are human caused in many parts of the state. With a harvest tax for wildfire protection, this landowner would not be paying anything to mitigate the cost of fire and patrol. In fact, the harvest tax, this is a disincentive for harvesting and managing the forest. Just another cost that could avoid otherwise. The fire protection should be burden of classified forest landowners as a whole, and even include many urban interface areas regardless of jurisdiction. All of them have risk and should pay into the system to promote wildfire. For those of you that don't know, all forest lands in Hood River County, privately owned, are taxed on their property tax for fire suppression. Doesn't matter if you have a half-acre lot of timber, or 10-acre lot of timber, or top of Fir Mountain, you're paying property tax that pays into that. And that way, everyone that has forest needs it protected is paying into it a little bit each year over time, not one lump sum once you harvest it. It's a system that's been in place for quite some time. It makes sense, and I think it works. So I'm really concerned with how the details work out in this bill that they're proposing. Doug, did I miss anything? Is there anything you want to add on that?
Well, there's quite a bit in there, and I'm sure you could get in the weeds further on some of it. You know, there's just still quite a few unknowns too in terms of what they're proposing and how it all turns out. I'm sure they're getting a lot of input from other interests as well. But I think you captured pretty much everything we talked about.
The AOC actually put out a stand that asked the legislators to not enact anything this year, but to give all the counties time to see what the proposals are and work through all the potential numbers, which is maybe a reasonable approach to this instead of trying to get into it so quick, because we don't know what the private land part of it will do to us. Probably help us to some extent, but I don't know how much because we haven't done the numbers on it yet. Any comments or questions by the board?
Arthur.
Arthur.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, So I sat in on Representative Williams' town hall meeting, and this subject came up, and there were several people from the East Multnomah County side who were speaking very positively about timber severance changes. So I weighed in and explained many of the aspects that you just explained, and explained to folks sort of at the basic level that 1/3 of our general fund comes from county forests, and that we'd basically be transferring our general fund dollars into the state treasury through this process. And what was interesting was that after I spoke, several of the folks who had spoken about this, and one of them actually made a comment. He said something along the lines of, you know, I just couldn't understand why any counties would be against this, and now I do. So what occurs to me is that there's just an incredible lack of understanding or information out there. And just in today's discussion with Commissioner Jayapal, and she's from Multnomah County also, she brought up the issue. Actually, she asked me, she said, hey, I hear things going on about the severance tax. What do you know about it? So I gave her the little pitch again. And she was completely unaware of the fact that there were county forests that would be affected negatively, and this would result in a transfer of revenue from general funds into state funds. So I think that the AOC's proposal to let this simmer for another year before pushing it probably makes sense, and I'm hoping that that gives us a chance to help people understand. The question for us is going to be, do we want to propose that publicly owned lands be exempted from this tax, or are we opposed to the tax in any form? And I think that's going to be an interesting question for us to consider.
Yeah, I think it's a very distinct question because there's significant differences between the private and public lands. And we'd have to know all the aspects, like Doug has tried to point out, of what things he knew about that I didn't know about. Even though I'm a forest land owner, I didn't know all those things that Doug was pointed out. Anything else, Doug?
Well, and I think it will be a little bit different for certain counties. Some counties have more federal land or more state land than we do. So we're a little bit unique. There's only a handful of counties that manage forest land like we do. It's us and Coos and Josephine County, and Douglas County has a little bit. We're the four main ones. Clackamas County has a little bit as well. So 5 main counties that actually manage a little bit of forest land, and several of them significantly so. I think they're all in the loop pretty much now. We had some conversation here a month or so ago as well, but there's a lot of other counties that don't. So I think hopefully it's not an uphill battle, but we might be a little bit of the minority here, definitely. But I think there could be some value. It's just interesting just knowing how they fund wildfire suppression in the state, and this would be a pretty big change. And what I don't know is kind of the intent or background, or what is it exactly they're trying to do, and who exactly are they trying to fund? What part of the firefighting resource are they funding? It's interesting. I haven't heard anything from Oregon Department of Forestry. Maybe that's all being done at the Salem level, but and also, a big part of the 5% tax would go to the OSU, I believe, for research and that kind of thing, forest research, at least down that line. And so, again, what's the need there? What's the drive there? I haven't heard anything in terms of why do they need that funding in that direction? Did they take that funding away from somewhere else? I don't understand that. So there's a lot in this, I'm sure, that it's just not fully available yet to know what's involved.
One of the
Go ahead,
ideas that I threw out to Representative Williams was, and sorry, Doug, if I took a bunch of things that you had said to me, and I probably merged them together in a way that may make no sense, but I suggested that they might want to consider having a severance tax which was graded based on the rotational length of harvest, and that could possibly be one way, rather than exempting counties, that could effectively, in Hood River's case at least, exempt us because we have such a large rotation. So for example, say zero tax for any, if you have rotational period over 60 years and grade it down based on number of years. So does that make any sense, or did I just make something up that can possibly work?
Well, I mean, it's just a different system. It's still dependent on harvest, though. And I guess part of the point that I was getting at is there's a lot of landowner and even small private landowners that really don't harvest in a substantial way. And so by pinning so much of the firefighting revenue to support firefighting on just harvest, harvest is only a small portion of the landowners is what I'm trying to get at, or a portion of them. And it's not capturing everybody that really needs the fire protection. And even like the urban interface, they wouldn't harvest potentially even in a way that would be captured with this tax, because usually there's a small exemption, like 25,000 board foot exemption on a lot of the harvest taxes currently. And so, your small landowners normally wouldn't even get captured with that kind of a tax. It's really going after the larger landowners, whether they're private or public.
My point was to create a disincentive for people like the real estate investment trusts who purchase the land and then look to get the timber off of it as fast as possible and then resell it. And that a tax like this, I'm not talking about the use of the money, I'm talking about using the tax as a disincentive for that sort of behavior.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly could do that. But I think if you're really looking at what is the money used for and how would you best allocate, or, how would you best, raise money or get money to be able to do that fire protection. I'm just not sure harvest tax is the best way to do it. Now, what you are doing is a little bit different. What your suggestion or proposal is a little bit different intent, I guess. You're trying to change forest management, sustainable forest management. Yeah. And again, that might be a great thing, but the money in this case is being channeled toward fire protection. And so if you're really trying to get fire protection money, I'm not sure harvest tax is the best way to do it, but that's my perspective too. That's just my 2 cents.
I would think by using harvest tax, it'd be a lot more inconsistent because, logging goes up and down and up and down. You look at what Weyerhaeuser's done the last 20 years and what they're going to do the next 10 years. It's like night and day. I mean, it's just unbelievable difference. But if you're taxing everybody, go ahead.
They will have dodged a bullet.
Yeah. But if you're taxing all the forest lands, no matter what, on property tax a little bit over each year, it's more sustainable and more, I think it's fair. Anyway, we'll have time to talk about this again, and I'm sure things will be interesting down at the state level to see what happens. So this time, I think we'll move on to our next part of our meeting. Work session action items. We have a County Forest Recreation Trails appointment. Recommendation is appointed Jim Thornton as a citizen rep on the County Forest Recreational Trails Committee.
So moved.
Okay.
Any discussion? Commissioner Babbitts?
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Joplin?
Yes.
Commissioner Benton?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. I also threw in the UGA discussion that we had a little earlier in our work session, so we could talk about it a little bit more. It is interesting that we have an urban growth area that basically has some governances that don't apply in that area. I mean, people don't have anybody representing them with governance, and that just doesn't seem right. And it's a system that we kind of set up between us and the city, maybe had good reasons, but I don't think it's being fair to the people in the UGA. I'm just throwing that out so we can start the conversation.
Chair, this is Karen. As I understand it, Eric, the premise was that as we implement ordinances and such in this boundary area, that we follow what the city has in place, since eventually the premise is that these lands will be annexed into the city. So it would make sense to have developments and such follow the city ordinances. If I recall, there were sidewalks being put in around the West Cliff Drive, and some of the development that's attempting to take place down there at the old Charburger is being held up because they're being held to the city standards, since eventually all of that will be annexed in, or maybe it has at this point. But the premise was that ordinances would be implemented at the city, what the city wanted, since, I mean, eventually these lands are going to be inside the city limits. So I don't understand why short-term rentals would be any different.
Yeah, so that's correct. The idea is that there be a seamless transition at the time of annexation, that people who are in the urban growth area are already operating under the city's guidelines, and that's the way our urban area management agreement was set up. The issue, though, is over time, the city has made a number of changes to their code, and those changes have not been forwarded to the county for adoption, and we have just been overloaded to, we just haven't had the ability to go to the city and say, hey, we would like we would like to adopt all the ordinances that you've adopted over time. Certainly that's on our plan, but we need some assistance in order to make that happen. And so what has happened is you do have some areas where the codes do not match any longer, and this is one of those cases.
So it's not really a question of policy. It's more a question of human resource availability and capacity to accommodate the original intent.
That's right. The policy is there, and part of the management agreement that stipulates the process for the county to adopt codes that would apply in the urban growth area.
So the adoption of those plans for that would be just for that urban growth area and wouldn't apply to the rest of the county outside the urban growth boundary?
That's correct.
Sounds like a money problem again.
I would add one thing that has changed since I've arrived at the county as it relates to sort of the impact of the code mismatch between the city and the county that affects the UGA. And that is the city adopting the policy that development is not allowed unless you are able to connect to the sewer. And so when we get people that come in, unless they're already connected to the city sewer, we send them to the city to get connected to the sewer, and if they can't, then they don't get to develop, which that's not a great solution necessarily, but it has impacted the activity level within the UGA.
But that issue came about with the development over there by Westside School that happens on the other side of Belmont, and it was resolved as the development did take place.
Yeah, and they did annex. And so as pockets of area within the UGA want to develop into a higher use, they're going to need to be able to attach to city utilities, and in order to do that, they have to annex. The difficulty comes in for people who say are on the other side of somebody that doesn't want to annex, but they want to develop and they can't get utilities, so they're hamstrung because between them and the city is somebody that doesn't want to annex. And therein lies a problem for that particular party if they're wanting to develop their land.
But that's not really related to this policy piece about implementing city ordinances inside the urban growth boundary. That's more of a development question and infrastructure question for the city. And I'll just say one more thing and then I'll go ahead.
It does, though. What it does is it cuts down the inference of these types of issues, because people end up annexing, which makes them then subject to the city code. So there's less probability that these kinds of issues are going to come up as a result of the city changing their policy. That was what I was trying to say.
Right.
It still is an issue, but as you move through time, it becomes less of an issue. And as Erik has pointed out, you know, it is a resource issue not only for the county, but to some degree for the city as well. And since I've been with the county, we've had a couple of meetings with the city to try to determine if there's a way by which, if these issues come up, that actually the city's code applies within the UGA and the city actually enforces their own code, as opposed to county staff having to know and understand two sets of code and apply them based on which side of a line you're on, which is not a great place for the county to be. Even if we had all kinds of resources available to us, administering two completely separate sets of code is difficult at best, from my perspective anyway. Granted, there's going to be some similarities, but there's also going to be a lot of differences. And that's a tough thing to do.
Absolutely. And your point somewhat dovetails with a potential suggestion for conversation of this board would be to consider a public-public partnership, maybe outsource a project to create alignment with these codes for the UGB so that we could work forward and share the cost with the city. Just an idea, maybe something to consider.
So I would like to jump in that I agree very much with what Commissioner Joplin just said, because I think she really got to the heart of the matter, that anything that we can do to accelerate the rectification of the gap in the code is going to be to our benefit. Concerning the equity or the fairness issue that Chair Oates brought up, the way that I view it is, when you buy a house, when you buy property within the urban growth area, you should understand that under Oregon law, that urban growth area is likely representing a 20-year supply, a 20-year future supply for the city that you're next to, and that you should have every expectation that your property will be annexed into the city within a 20-year time period. So I don't feel that people have, I don't think it's reasonable or fair for people to say, well, I bought a house in the urban growth area and now now I'm being forced to live with city rules or city policy. When you buy that property, we're not changing urban growth area. It's been there for a long time. This isn't a new situation. They were put on notice a long time ago about that. So I don't think this is an unfairness issue.
I want to make one other comment that's a little bit off track, but it's all within the urban growth area. I read the original document between the city of Hood River and Hood River County back when Roger Schock was the chairman, and the agreement that they came up with on the urban growth area stated that lands inside that urban growth area could hook up to the sewer lines, even though they weren't within the city limits or on that part of the city. But I believe they needed to sign a MOU saying that they understood and would, when time came for being annexed in the city, that they would accept that to do away with some of the problems with that. I believe that's the way it was worded.
So waiver
somewhere along the line, they quit doing that. They decided they weren't going to do it.
There's a whole bunch of issues there. First of all, it's a waiver of remonstrance that they had to sign, and the state came along and said that any of the waivers of remonstrance prior to 1992, I think it was, have been thrown away by the state. And Erik, did I get that year right? It's 1992.
I don't remember the date. No.
Okay. So a lot of that was just flushed down the toilet, and then there are regulations concerning extension, allowing people to repair septic systems versus how close they are to to an existing septic line. So there's a whole bunch of complicated stuff that came in. But what happened was there were agreements that were made back in the old days, especially regarding the creation of the Frankton Sewer Project, which probably violate law and certainly violate any reasonable policy for orderly development. The point is, in Oregon, you're supposed to be part of a city if you're going to do dense development. And to extend sewer service really well beyond the municipal boundary just makes no sense. And I can't, well, I see Commissioner Benton shake his head on it because he's been involved with the whole, the emergency situation up at Windmaster. But the general policy, it does not make sense to be extending sewer service beyond the municipal boundary. And that's what annexation exists for.
Okay, we're almost getting on up to a different topic here on the efficiency of the development of the UGA. But back to the point that Karen brought up, that maybe we should be looking at trying to do something jointly with the city to combine these rules and regulations so that we have a system that one of us can actually implement and the people that live in the UGA can have some governance. Jeff, where do we go from here? You want to have a conversation with the city?
I'm certainly happy to do that. I would tell you those conversations have occurred, but we can continue to have them.
Okay.
I guess I don't know enough about the existing policy that we have. I would enjoy a work session and have that information to understand what we're doing currently. So I better understand what our existing policy is. I just don't understand, I think there's a lot to talk about here, and I think it's going to require us to all, I mean, everybody else may have a greater knowledge of what we're doing today, but this just seems like a large conversation that would require a pretty good block of time.
Okay, I agree.
Mr. Chair, I've spent a lot of time on the other side of the fence, and I heard exactly the opposite story, which is leaving me really confused. What I kept hearing is that the city has been making code changes, and the county is supposed to be keeping up with them, and they're just dragging their feet and not keeping up with them. So there's some disconnect here. I'd love to know what's actually the case, and I mean, I had a good talk with Erik the other day, and I know that what I've been hearing is not at all his view of things, but I'd really like to just lay it out so we really know what's going on.
Okay, why don't we have another conversation about this in another day, and we'll think about it for the next few weeks. Does that sound all right? Okay, thanks, Erik. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next up's our consent agenda.
I'll move approval of the consent agenda as presented.
Thank you, Erik.
I will second.
Any discussion? Commissioner Benton?
Yes.
Commissioner Joplin?
Yes.
Commissioner Perkins?
Yes.
Commissioner Babbitts?
Yes.
Chair votes yes. New business. Report on county forest land exchange concept. Doug, I think you're up.
All right, well, I'm going to go ahead and try to get a few things turned on here. I'd like to share one of my screens as well. And can all of you see the Haglund Exchange Proposal notes I have up?
Now I can.
Yep.
Okay.
Update?
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I'll go ahead and proceed. You may have them half read already, but yeah, I'd like to give an update, kind of where we've come from on this proposal. And it actually started back in the late spring, kind of in the middle of COVID last year. Mr. Haglund had proposed exchanging approximately 47.82 acres of land in Lower Post Canyon. It actually consists of 7 contiguous parcels. And then you would exchange that for approximately 153 acres of the Routson tract off Highway 35, a little ways south of Parkdale. And I'll go into a little more detail on that. I guess I'll start with the Routson tract and kind of look at, or no, sorry, excuse me, the Post Canyon one here. Get that pulled up. So the Post Canyon tract is this area outlined in red. It kind of sits midway between where people park at the bottom of Post Canyon Drive down here, where the end of the pavement's right about here. Where my cursor is. Can you folks see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, great. So where my cursor is about where the end of the pavement is, and that's near, close to where folks kind of end parking, the majority of the parking there. You got to actually go up the road about a quarter mile or so to get to the Haglund property. And then the road and the creek goes through that property, and you go up a little over a quarter mile. And then you get back onto actually some state land, back onto private a little bit, and then onto some state land before you get to the Seven Streams trailhead. So really it kind of sits in the middle, kind of no man's land. It's not flat terrain by any means. It's not really steep, but it's just steep enough to be obnoxious, I guess. If you're trying to do anything development wise or maybe even agriculture or something like that, it's a little bit steeper than you might prefer. But nonetheless, what makes this so important in a way is that, all the folks parking at the bottom of Post Canyon, they ride up the canyon sometimes on the road, but there are some old trails over the years that have been established, and those make their way through the Haglund property as well. And it has become a little bit of a concern over the last few years, especially, and Mr. Haglund's definitely concerned with all the traffic potential liability that he incurs there as well. And so he proposed this exchange. And, I look back at, our recreation trail ordinance that was created in almost 20 years ago. And, it definitely considered this type of thing, this type of transaction to gain access for the recreation trails. And I think this was probably one of the example areas, not specific to Mr. Haglund's property, but Post Canyon generally, was one of the things that whoever crafted that ordinance was envisioning, that there's places where it would really be beneficial for the county to pursue access and locations for access to the county trail system on the county forest. So I felt it was important to meet with Mr. Haglund, and we did, and in June. And so we have this parcel here, and it's zoned large woodland. It's in the National Scenic Area, so the zoning is GF1. And it's actually fairly, there's 6 criteria that you have to meet in order to put a home site on one of these tracts. You have to show that you need it to be able to manage the woodland. I've been told that while it is possible to get a home site on it, it's never been done in Hood River County yet. So that should give you an indication. As to the productivity levels that you might see here, it's marginal growth. It's probably just a little below average. Certainly not above average. It's low elevation, and that's a big factor, because as we drop elevation, we drop some of that rainfall, and that's an important piece to growing trees around here. But you will see a fair amount of Doug fir and some grand fir scattered across it, but there's also a fair component of some maple and oak on portions of the properties as well. So again, that oak, you start getting into that, and you can estimate that your productivity is not quite as high as some other areas of the county forest. So that's a factor to consider. And then I'm going to show the other parcel that Mr. Haglund was interested in. And this is the Routson tract off Highway 35. And some of you might recall that here's kind of the little loop that went down to Routson Campground at one time. All the sites and infrastructure there has been decommissioned and removed. So there's none of that there other than just the road itself. You can still walk down there on that. It has been blocked off by Highway 35, but at least gives you the general location of that. But really the tract is much bigger. It goes to actually both sides of the East Fork of the Hood River. You've got over a half mile of river frontage. You've got a half mile of Highway 35 frontage on both sides. This parcel has. And there's certainly some areas here that are not productive and probably won't be in our lifetime, but still of the areas that are productive, it's a fair amount. It's pretty good. It's zoned primary forest, F2, about 80% of it, and then there's about 20% is forest F1. I estimate the volume on this tract to be about 2.5 million board feet of timber, and even with the buffers that you have along the Hood River, and you've got some scenic highway rules for Highway 35, there's still a fair amount of timber here, so that's going to definitely drive the cost up. Your growth rates here are above average, at least average or above average timberland. And one of the things I wanted to point out is this. You can see the shaded green here. This is a tract. It's a connector piece, kind of between east and west on our south ownership. So if we were to sell this piece off, it would break that continuity up, and that's something to consider. We try to make things contiguous and try to block things up. And while it is along a narrow strip, it is a connector, from Cooper Spur over here to the west, all the way down across to Highway 35. So, from a management perspective, you like to keep things more blocked up and for access and things like that. And if we did get rid of this, that would definitely disconnect that. And the other thing I want to point out is value. So what does all this mean? If I was to do a back in the napkin estimate of value for these two tracts, this Routson tract, I would expect it to run, 1.5 million and up. There's enough timber on it, mature timber, some pretty good sized timber in places, that I would expect it to take, to hold a pretty good value right now. Whereas the tracts on Post Canyon, I think you're topping out around $750,000 at the highest. So a fair amount of difference there, and that's just a ballpark. What it would actually appraise for, I would expect to be different, but it kind of gives you a little bit of a context to what values you might expect there. It's not exactly correlated to acres, but it still gives you an idea. So after we discussed this a little bit, and we didn't even really get into the values too much with Mr. Haglund when we talked back in June, but and he had his attorney was there, Anna Cavallari was there as well, and although she mostly just listened, took notes and such, I asked what kind of timeline he would like, and I think he really would have liked to done something this past year. Even during the summer or fall, I relayed that was going to be really tough to do because I had some other projects that we were working on at that time already kind of ahead in the queue. And, but we were listening and just kind of gathering information. And I discussed the steps that we would have to take with an exchange. We're dictated with Oregon statute. And because it's designated county forest, we would have to get a third-party appraisal, and it would need to be, the transaction would need to be for equal value and best interest of the county. Well, Irwin didn't really agree with the valuation methodology. He indicated his property may be worth more than the forest land he would get from the county. And we talked about potential for other lands that he would be willing to trade for. And he really was pretty well set on this Routson Park property. That was the one he really wanted. He wasn't too interested in other property, and he really wasn't even interested, at least at that time, in cash. And so my options were getting narrow. And the interesting thing is, it wasn't just a few weeks after this, another person actually called, unrelated in any way to this, and inquired about potentially purchasing the Routson Park property. I just thought that was an interesting thing. However, I had told Mr. Haglund, get back on track here, I had told Mr. Haglund it would take some time to review this, and I really didn't feel like I could even get to it with a good effort until closer to the end of the year. And so we kind of left with that in mind. I don't know that he was really happy with that, but I really felt like to put a little bit more effort into it, it would take at least that long. Well, in the meantime, Mr. Haglund did talk with other folks that I'm aware of, and I know talked with Karen, and so he shared some of the concept with the commissioners in December. And following that, the commissioners asked me to go ahead and present this to the Forest Advisory Committee and the Recreation Trail Committee to get their take on this. And so we did. I basically reviewed some of this very same information with them. And based on the committee discussion, we had a fair amount of discussion, good questions of the concept and proposal, the location and the values of the land, and you know, what could be done if we did this exchange. And it was unanimous that this would not be a good transaction for the county, because it's not equal. It's really not even appropriate based on what the feedback from the committee gave me. You know, really to be viable, we'd need to have some more negotiation, and you got to have a willing landowners on both sides if you're going to do an exchange. That's kind of the way it works. And you know, it's possible some transaction could occur. I wouldn't close the door all the way, but at least as proposed, this transaction was not favorable the way the committee saw it. So I did ask the Trail Committee a second question that's related to this and related to our ordinance, our trail ordinance. And the question was, should the Forestry Department in future years prioritize trail access and acquisition in the Post Canyon area relative to other trail projects, regardless of ownership, whether it's on our own property or elsewhere? And after, again, a fair amount of discussion by the Trail Committee and lots of good input, there was unanimous committee support for prioritizing Post Canyon access, recreational access. So, you know, I haven't determined exactly what that'll look like, but it's very possible we could start that as a subcommittee to begin evaluation of the potential and the players and the strategy to begin looking at acquisition or access, could be easements even, to enhance access there in the Post Canyon area. I have to say, of all the areas that we have access issues, that's got to be pretty close to the top of the list, and certainly probably involves the most number of people relative to who use the trails. And, you know, some good ideas came up even at the last meeting. I think there's other funding sources out there, including state, federal, local grants could be considered for match. And so now the work kind of begins on that, I think, in the future as time allows. Here, it could take years. I'm pretty optimistic, though, because we've got very energetic partners, and at least on that. So I digressed a little bit at the end, but I really, I think it's important to consider what goes on there in Post Canyon relative to the plans in the past from the ordinance, as well as the opportunity for the future And with that, I'm gonna stop for now and see if the commissioners have questions or any input.
Doug, can you take that screen off my screen? So I can see everybody.
Yeah, let me see if I can get that done here. It's not. Here we go. Got it.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, comments, commissioners? Questions?
Yeah, I mean, I'll comment. I think it's good that we looked at that, but I mean, that was kind of how I was viewing it all along. It's tough to trade a piece of working forest land that has good growth, has river frontage, had a park on it that could potentially be a park again one day, for a piece of land with lower growth potential and a whole lot more difficulties in terms of management. Even though it has a ton of potential for improving our rec trail system, I think you're right. We need to look at alternative ways to accomplish that. But I am interested in that. Looking at that parcel multiple times, it made me really think about potential for a park again there. There's not a lot of parks along the Hood River. It's really a pretty area when you go down in there. And I'm sure there's enough demand to utilize it. So that just triggered me going off on a whole tangent of what else could be done there.
This is Karen. I agree. I mean, the proposal probably isn't a good fit for the county for the reasons discussed. But the issue still exists. And the issue is that these private landowners are going to close the access completely. And that will affect the recreational use in that area. So I think the conversation still needs to revolve around, is it worth working through some potential easements, some smaller parcel purchases? I mean, what is the value, and do we have any resources to do that? Because it's been made clear that these private landowners are done with the dogs, the usage, and they certainly have a right to close off all of it and fence it and do whatever they want to do. So I think that's the conversation we need to focus on. But I think I agree that the proposal is probably not quite the right fit as proposed.
Mr. Babbitt?
I agree with what's been said, and I would just like to reinforce, when I see the Routson property, knowing the history of it, I think of its park value before I think of its forestry value. And I don't know what the commission has stated on this. I don't know what the existing state of that is. I've got some great photos though of the original homestead cabin that was down there 130 years ago. So it is, it's a special spot, and I think that Commissioner Perkins stated that well. In terms of closing off access, I just remember that the road the road access can't be closed off. It's the trails that have been built without permission through private property that would be closed off, and any fencing that would happen. They can't stop people from parking on the roadside within the right of way. They can stop people from doing things on their property, but I don't know that people are parking on private property.
Mr. Ben?
Well, I would agree with almost everything that's been said. This seems like an issue we need to figure out how to address in that area specifically, and what we want to do with the trails access on that in that part of the, specifically in that part as well as other places. But yeah, with respect to the proposal, for a lot of reasons, it's not going to work. I don't know where we go though, how we continue to try to keep addressing this. I don't have a good answer for that. And maybe that's something, I don't know how Doug feels about, if you were, I don't know what you're thinking, because the proposal I don't think is going to work. So then what?
Yeah, I think, kind of I alluded to, I think from the trail committee standpoint, it's in, we prioritize this as a project over maybe some other things that we would be working on instead. And probably get a small group of people, handful of people that for kind of a subcommittee that we can begin to work on a strategy and a plan to accomplish access in Post Canyon. And that could include purchasing property, we need to connect with some of the other public landowners in that area too, and or agencies that would be involved in the end. There's some pretty strict limitations on what you can build there for public parking relative to the scenic area. And I've done just enough research on that to realize that's going to be a big hurdle in of itself, even if we acquired a fair amount of suitable property for that. So it's going to take some effort to crack this nut, but I don't think it's impossible either. I think there may be some willing landowners already that would be willing to work with us, and it just, given a year or two, I think we could start to make some progress down this road.
So Doug, the recreational trails committee would be kind of spearheading this subcommittee then? Or be part of that committee, or what are we talking here?
Yes, I would probably lean on that committee first to do it because of, it's more of a recreational use. Now, it's not to say that if it ended up being forest land, that, we had some input from the Forest Advisory Committee too. And, another idea here is you could potentially, instead of putting all the burden on your forest land funds, for example, or an exchange of just forest land, that potentially you match that up with some other grant money or something like that to acquire public access lands. So you're not putting all the burden on your forest land, which is really paying your bills right now. So because this land, some of it, in this case, this piece that we were talking about on the Haglund property, could have some timber value, but I don't think you would be able to maximize it like you do on a lot of the rest of our forest. Just given you've got the road, all of the traffic through there, you've also got a fish-bearing stream going through there. And relative to the side of the property, it starts to really eat away. So at all of that. So again, some productivity there, a little bit lower, but really the whole point of that acquisition is recreation. And so I think trying to find some recreation funds to pair with it would make a lot more sense.
Okay, well, it sounds like we're pretty much in agreement that we're not leaning towards the land exchange. Definitely not doing that. And also talking about looking at access for that area and maybe having a subcommittee start working on that. I know these people are really gung-ho about trying to do more and trying to be involved in getting things done to help out with the process for the rec trails, and maybe working on access and looking at different grants and things would be a good idea. I know we've talked or I've talked to people that are interested in us trying to do a little bit more of the recreational angle when we're looking at our forest lands and not be so strict into just tree farming. That things are changing. We've got different people, different clientele, different members of Hood River County that live here now that would really like us to be a little bit more aligned with recreational and not just strictly farming. So I think in my old age, I'm pretty set in my ways, but I don't think my ways are going to be here forever. So we need to start looking at access and promoting this and allowing it to take place and make sure it works well. And so I'm glad you're going to set up a subcommittee to start working on that. Any other comments by the board?
Just a piece about making full circle with follow-up with Erwin. If I'm hoping you can communicate with him about our discussion tonight, and that it sounds like we're supportive of moving forward with a subcommittee discussion around helping out with it, whether it's easements or what other options might be available, but that public bodies move a little slow in these conversations, because I think they're looking to have something happen by the summer, and they plan on making changes this summer around the use. So I just want to make sure that we make full circle loop of communicating what we talked about tonight, what we can do, and what we hope to do in the future with continuing the conversation with a subcommittee.
That sounds good, Karen. And I do want to offer one other comment that was made during the committee meeting by one of the one of the key trail constituents. They'd had actually quite a few conversations with the Haglunds as well, working with them, looking at solutions. But they actually made the comment, and this is more from the mountain bike community, that they didn't really see that as a huge problem if people are riding on the road for that stretch. A lot of people do already. So they didn't really feel like that was a hurdle, at least, you know, in the short term of a few years. But I think long term, everybody understands that there's got to be some better ways to approach this and maybe get people off the road part of the time. And I'm one of those people that would like to see people off the road part of the time. So, you know, so it will take some time, though.
Okay. Well, thanks, Doug, for your work on this. I know it's not exactly growing trees, but it's kind of part of our process anymore as we move forward in how we use our forests. So this time we're going to move into executive session. Lisa is under the weather and I don't believe will be joining us, but in case she is by phone, it would be executive session under ORS 192.6602H legal counsel potential litigation and ORS 192.6602D labor negotiations. Okay, Heidi, you can move us into executive session, please.
Start off, sure.
Okay, Chair Oates, it'll just take me just a moment. So
that's fine.
If I might say, just for any attendees that are on, the commissioners are going to go into executive session. I'm going to move them into a practice session. You're welcome to stay on the line. You won't hear nor see anything. And then Chair Oates will move the commission back into regular session when executive session is done.
Good night. Thank you.